Go. I'm ready.
Welcome to With Thunderous Applause, a podcast where two friends get together and talk about the events and the ideas that will shape our uncertain future. I am your host, Steve, along with my co-host and producer, Zach. What is up, my friend?
Not a mucho. Long weekend. Are ending it with Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Not a whole lot going on.
Yeah.
Trying to stay at home, not spend any money.
That's a good way to be. So yeah, it's interesting. You bring up Martin Luther King Jr. Day, which is today. I knew it was coming, but it didn't really click until I woke up this morning and I was like, I live across the street from a elementary school and a childcare facility. And so I look and I was like, why is it so fucking quiet? Dude, is it Sunday? Do we still have a day left of the weekend? No, it is Monday, but no one is out, right? And it's interesting because I didn't even realize that when I wanted to put together a show on civil unrest. On this show, we talk about various processes of civilizational decline and collapse. We've been talking a lot about global instability and the end of the the impending end of the petrodollar and other kinds of crises that are going to really impact the kind of OECD developed nations in a way that's really unprecedented, maybe parallel in the Great Depression, something probably at least as severe as the 2008 crisis without any of the financial wizardry to kind of pull us out like we did in 2008, 2009. So a lot of uncertainty in our future and a lot of tension within our country and our body politic. And so it is fitting in some ways that it's Martin Luther King Jr. Day because we want to talk about civil unrest, and it just kind of naturally through that process of crafting a narrative for today's show, I wanted to talk about violence versus nonviolence, and what a perfect topic for today.
Yeah, because one of those works and one doesn't.
Well, I mean, I think that we'll be surprised to find that it's not a settled debate.
Yeah, and it does tend to work in tandem.
Right, exactly. Generally, when examples are provided of why only nonviolence works, generally they're cherry picking the things they want and ignoring the fact that like social movements have multiple components, and you can't say one faction is the reason that it succeeded, right? When there were pressure from other factions that contributed to eventual concessions.
Exactly.
And so a lot of this started out of the kind of force the vote stuff we talked a little bit about, I think, last time. And, these movement within the right-wing congressional leadership to force concessions and get what they want by basically like making a scene, and it almost went to blows. And so like there's a lot of tension, I think, not just within our political institutions, but obviously in society, right? We just had the January 6th anniversary, which we don't need to hash that. I'm kind of indifferent about it. I definitely think it was a big fucking deal, but I also don't think it was like something we need to keep revisiting, right?
Right. We couldn't possibly cover it well enough in a 6-hour live stream, I think.
Right. And more recently, and really what kind of got the wheels turning in my head and wanting to do this discussion was the similar event in Brazil. We actually did not provide any clips of what's happening in Brazil, and it's an oversight that just dawned on me, but that's okay because you can find that information anywhere, and you can find fantastic analysis on what's happening. Aaron Mate, who writes for the Gray Zone, has been hosting Jimmy Dore's show while he's on vacation, and he had a fantastic guest that was on the ground. Actually, two guests. I think both of his guests were in Brazil. One was actually at street protest, and one was in a location that was much more quiet. But you get a good, you get a good picture of what's going on there, plus Breakthrough, and all the other people that we kind of draw from. They all have good reporting on it and can explain it. But basically, the right-wing faction violently oppose the peaceful transition of power.
Right.
And it's a test to the new government, whether they're going to do what our government did, and that's use it as an excuse to further erode our civil liberties, and enhance the surveillance state,
Always.
etc.
At any
What are
given
your
opportunity.
thoughts?
At
Well,
any given opportunity, enhancing the surveillance state is always going to be an option and the first option. I mean, although does it really even need to be enhanced all that much? You've got the cameras on the stoplights and stuff like that, supposedly to, lead to better traffic your behavior. But I mean, it doesn't work. It's for tracking where certain cars belonging to certain people are going.
yeah,
And
did I
then
ever? Sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and then we all voluntarily, give up our data to Google and
We do.
Amazon and all the various places. So like, how much more enhancing does it need? We're already pretty damn well tracked.
Yeah. Yeah, the surveillance state, man, it's fucking crazy. What have you read about Brazil, and what are your thoughts on that? Do you have much? Just kind of it kind of almost to me made sense that it happened, and it doesn't
Yeah, I
surprise
mean,
me.
I don't know. To me, it seems like one of those right wingers gonna right wing situations where
Mhm.
the worldwide agreement seems to be that if you're on the right wing and you lose, you were cheated, and so you need to have some sort of massive demonstration or attempted coup, whatever you choose to call it, showing that you're dissatisfied with the fact that you lost. And then if you're on the left wing, you're just like, well, we lost, and so of course we're just going to peacefully transfer power over to the other side. And I don't know. Eventually, it seems like the inevitable result of that is that strong men take over, and you have authoritarianism. Because
Yeah.
left wing doesn't want to stand up for itself.
Pardon me, Jesus.
Probably because it's all the same.
It's
It's all
it,
the same people.
yeah, interesting that you say that, because just when you were talking, I was kind of thinking of January 6th versus like Occupy Wall Street, right? Like,
Right.
where left wing agitation, although there was a fair contingent of kind of like libertarian, anti-federal reserve kind of element to, at least at the encampments that I visited and spent time in. There was definitely like a kind of more libertarian element, which I thought was good, because there was a diversity of ideas being explored in that space. And that's kind of why it was, in a lot of ways, really important for my political maturity, is just being able to have conversation. Like, that's all you did. Like,
You had
all
nothing
we
else
really
to
did was
do.
just fucking
Yeah.
talk about fucking ideas, and it was really powerful and
Did you know that
rewarding.
you can break, public property and try to kidnap senators, though?
No. We didn't talk about that.
Oh, okay.
But my point is how Occupy Wall Street focused on what? I was at Occupy K Street in DC
Mhm.
for about a week, because I was in the military and working, right? Like, but I did take some time off, and was able to go down there and camp out and help with camp management, et cetera, so forth. But it was interesting because K Street was across the street from K Street's known. That's where all the lobbyists are. There's these big office towers,
Right.
and they all have suites in these office towers. And so we were there because of lobbyists.
Right.
And the main encampment in New York City was at Wall Street, recognizing between those two encampments, recognizing that the power comes from the financial institutions,
Mhm.
and is leveraged via the lobbyists in DC, right? And so
Right.
we were attacking power, and just the juxtaposition of largely nonviolent. Of course, like every once in a while, bricks get thrown or whatever. Fuck it. But largely, the occupations and stuff were pretty jubilant.
Mhm.
And compare that to like a January 6th, where they're going after the bad politicians, right?
Right,
Instead
right.
of attacking the system, they just want to get rid of the people that they believe are in the way of their agenda, which is a tacit acknowledgement that the institutions are legitimate, versus Occupy Wall Street, which is
Yeah.
political institutions are illegitimate because the real power flows from the financial sector through the lobbyists into the political system.
Yes.
Does that make sense? What are your thoughts
Yes.
on that?
Well, I mean, you're basically talking about, legal bribery versus, we just want to get rid of the people that we disagree with. It sounds like Occupy Wall Street was primarily about, I don't care which side of the spectrum you're on, you're still utilizing money to get what you want. And I want to stop all of that. Whereas, of course, January 6th was a group of people on one side of the political spectrum saying, no one on the other side can possibly be good or right, and everyone on our side is good or right. Let's go attack the other side. And
Yeah.
regardless of what people who were involved might say, there were violent acts, and there was the intention of violence. The intentionality was there.
Sorry, I almost dropped my phone. Yeah, I think you're 100% right. And I'm not going to say that they weren't, and we're not really here to debate that.
Right.
There, Occupy K, there was some pretty fucking radical, wild shit, but
Oh yeah, I
we
mean,
didn't
you're
try
gonna have
and
that.
break into any fucking federal buildings
Right.
for
It
sure.
wasn't the bulk of the people doing that action. You said, that you had, of course, small pockets of people that are throwing bricks or cans of soup or whatever, what have you.
Cans of
Uh,
soup.
Soup for my family. Cans of soup. Hey, why? We can say that it's soup for my family. Why can't we say that it's bricks for the wall? I mean, come on.
That's right. Oh, I forgot. Thank you for reminding me of
Oh, you're
that.
welcome.
I forgot that was a whole meme, right? Of like soup
Yeah,
for
yeah,
my family.
yeah, exactly.
Because it's like, oh, you can bring weapons into a protest zone by basically
Can't.
being like, no, they're groceries.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at the same time, it's like, okay, cool. Like people with fucking, cans of soup have to just be like, oh, it's groceries, that I'm going to use to feed my family. But then, like, other people just get to bring guns, and it's no fucking big deal. Like,
Yeah.
there's no
Or
fucking,
yeah,
there's no fairness
so
to it.
so we were talking kind of about past events, right?
Yeah.
But that are part of this process, right? Anti-globalization movement, forward, um, responding to this kind of capitalist totality where the whole globe is covered by this, and we're kind of under constant assault of propaganda that
Hmm.
conditions us to accepting our subjugation to the system, and um and also the process of collapse, energy depletion, resource depletion,
Right.
climate change being another. We've talked a lot about natural disasters and how
Well,
that can contribute to disrupting the things that we consider normal, which is a fossil fueled industrial economy.
right. And then
Um,
also the massive othering to attempt to distract from the fact that it's not your average everyday person who's causing all of this. It's massive, corporations, it's billionaires, it's you know people who are in charge who make millions of dollars off of shady shady stock trading and stuff like that, and directing us at one another so that we don't notice the man behind the curtain.
right. Yeah, for sure. Um, and so like these little this fomenting, I tried to find a YouTube clip where they took they call him Sergeant Blueberry in a lot of the
Okay.
commentary on the show Andor, which we've talked about.
Mm,
They call him Sergeant Blueberry, but he was the kind of like overzealous corpo cop in the first arc, with
what
the
did
kind of
he?
really thick kind of Scottish accent or whatever.
Okay. Oh yeah, 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 yeah. Oh, comes back later on. And
Yeah, he
yeah,
comes back in the final episode, and
yeah.
which he's a character that I love him so much. The fact that like after all that shit goes down in the final episode, he's just in a fucking alley drinking is just like
Perfect.
it's just a wonderful kind of visual element of his character's kind of desperation or
I mean,
disillusionment, right, with
it's
how everything went down.
yeah,
Yeah,
and it's a nice commentary on what happens to a lot of people that are in security or military and who have their view of the world and themselves shattered and who turn to substances.
right. But anyway, Sergeant Blueberry, there's this line where he's like, "There's fomenting, sir. There's fomenting." And I wanted to find that clip because that's what all of these things do. So today we're going to get into it now. Most analysts say, the people who track this, which of course it's like, like it's think tanks and other things that are
Yeah,
interested in about political stability, because we need political stability for capitalism to continue to profit and accumulate, right? And
and
so
I
they're
I
researching
imagine
it.
you I imagine
Go
you get a
ahead.
lot of data from insurance companies too.
You do, absolutely. I always try and convince my right-wing parents, like, yo, if you really like think climate change isn't a thing, go to the reinsurance agencies, the insurance agencies of insurance agencies,
Oh
and
god.
see what they have to say about it, because
Right.
they're the ones whose their entire business model is making bets on the likelihood of shit.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so if the reinsurance companies are like, oh, this is a big fucking deal, then you can probably bet it's a big fucking deal.
And if you
Because we're
start
not
seeing
talking about, you know, a few $100 million in solar subsidies from the US government. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds, if not trillions of dollars worth of wealth that's being insured and reinsured.
oh yeah, absolutely. And then, of course you can see as soon as you start seeing, the prices for places that aren't coastal yet going up, drastically, that's probably because they're going to be coastal soon.
Maybe, yeah. Sea level rise is kind of one of those interesting things. But anyway, we're going to talk about civil unrest in specifically in the context of rising inflation globally. But
Mhm.
I love the fact that like that's largely ignored in the American context. We're like, oh, it's because they gave you and me got $600 because of the
1,400.
fucking pandemic, and
Right.
somehow that's responsible. Right.
Absolutely, man. Do you know how many people got that? Literally dozens.
Right, but I mean, it's not, if you look deep into it, like most of them spent on debt, right? Like most
Yeah.
people are like, "Oh, I'll clear that credit card," or
Or put it right
whatever.
back into the economy. We bought a freaking robotic litter box for our cats with the first
Oh,
one.
so you are contributing to inflation.
I no, 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 the opposite. I'm not saving. I'm spending.
Well, no, but yeah, that's why they say it's a demand side inflation, but it's not.
Uh,
And I didn't want to include a lot on inflation because we've kind of talked about it.
yeah, yeah.
But there's some pretty good videos out there that talk about it being kind of a combination of factors. But we do have inflation, and that is causing unrest now. Um, Revolutionary Blackout Network, a channel I follow and I hold in very high esteem, just did one on homelessness and how homelessness is used to justify increased police budgets. And that kind of made me think about how, at least in my community, probably in communities all up and down the state and across the country, like have really kind of like develop some really kind of reactionary elements to them,
Mhm.
largely based on homelessness, which we've discussed before.
Oh yeah.
And then there's also like impending food insecurity. I mean, we're already have a lot of food insecurity globally, but like the Ukraine, if you recall, like the Arab Spring happened, there was a bad drought,
Mhm.
and a lot of grain imports to North Africa and the Middle East and other places that don't produce a lot themselves due to climate or landform or
Right.
availability of water or whatever. They import a lot of food. And because of those bad droughts, then those governments had to be like, well, we have to feed our own people too.
Mhm.
So we're going to limit exports, and then sorry, like we need this for our people, we can't export to you, and then it causes all sorts of civil unrest, right?
Right. Right. I
And
mean,
yeah, go ahead,
uh,
please.
standing in line at the grocery store because they claim they can't afford more employees and they only have three out of their 8 lanes open. I had plenty of time to talk with the guy in front of me about flooding in the area, the price of eggs, and we got to discussing like it's eggs now, due to various factors. What comes next? And I was like, probably flour, because we get so much of our grain from Ukraine. And he was like, I hadn't thought about that. It's like, yeah.
Well, I'm not sure how much we import because the U.S. has leveraged food as a weapon. That was a policy under the Nixon administration when we were kind of like, all right, what can we do, right? And then food
Right.
became a weapon, and that's I think official policy. I'm pretty sure was that we would use food as a weapon. That's why like NAFTA completely fucking destroyed like indigenous and peasant agriculture in Mexico, for example, and force those people to go into factories that we, said, oh, they can move there and they won't have to pay import duties into the U.S. And so there was this kind of whole structure where we prioritized American agriculture over other countries in trade deals because it is a strength. However, that doesn't invalidate your statement that food prices will, if it's sold on a global market,
Right.
then food prices will go up, right?
Oh, and the people providing it will use any excuse that they can latch on to in order to increase prices. And it's been discussed that when people think a price is going to go up, they just jack the price anyway. They're like, oh, we've already prepped people's minds to believe the price is going to go up, so might as well just jack up the price.
Right. Corporate greed's a huge part of it. But let's get into our articles because we have a fuck ton of them.
We have a fuck ton. We're over to your
and so we're going to start with a Common Dreams article. Really summarize it. Let me know when the screen is up.
It's on to you. Yeah.
Okay, great. Drawing attention to this article, worst is yet to come as global civil unrest index hits an all-time high. All-time high.
Yeah.
And of course, there's an index, right? Because Verisk, Maplecroft, a consulting firm, does analysis on this. And they said, let's see, incorporating data going back to 2017, the latest update to the firm's civil unrest index shows the last quarter of this year saw more countries witness an increase in risks from civil unrest than at any time since the index was released. Out of 198 countries, that's 198 countries total in the world, 101 saw an increase in risk compared to only 42 where risk had decreased. In December 2020, we warned of a new era of civil unrest, projecting that 75 countries would see an increase in civil unrest risk by August 2022, and the reality has been far worse, with 120 countries witnessing an increase in risk. With more than 80 countries around the world seeing inflation above 6%, socioeconomic risks are reaching critical levels, the analysis explains. Almost half of all countries on the CUI are now categorized as high or extreme risk, and a large number of states are expected to experience a further deterioration over the next 6 months.
And this was how old? September. So we are now at the tail end of that 6-month period.
Right. And this is really just kind of beginning, right? Like we're still much on a seasonal nature, right? So Europe has been very warm. Actually much warmer than it was originally anticipated. That's why the Russian offensive in Ukraine only began like this last week or two. And there was kind of a strategic withdrawal and a fortification of their line. And then they were waiting for the fucking ground to freeze so they can move tanks in because light infantry doesn't do well against mortars, right?
Right.
They need the ground to freeze so they can bring in their armor. And as we discussed the weapons, Ukraine weapons going to Nazis kind of thing, one of those charts we looked at, if you recall, showed how many more tanks the Russian Federation has over countries like the U.S. and then the NATO alliance, right?
I saw an article title where they Ukraine was thanking beavers for creating marshy terrain. saying that basically, due to the fact they have so much marshy terrain, it's making the invasion more difficult. It's like, yeah, I mean that's entirely true. We saw it in World War I and World War II when Germans tried to come over into France. So history repeats itself.
What is the joke? Never wage a land war in Asia.
Just give it up.
But
You're gonna fucking fall into a sinkhole.
My point is that there's still some seasonality to how these things play out.
Oh,
and then of course there's responses, right? So it's the future you cannot predict. What did Yoda say?
Always in motion the future is.
Yeah, always in motion the future is, right? So we can say trends, right? We can look at this and say there's a lot of risk factors. And so it's much more likely, and we can say that with a high degree of confidence. We can't say on this week in this region this will happen, right?
Right. Not yet.
So in a separate index measuring government stability within countries, the firm found that 42 nations saw an increased risk of having their governments challenged or toppled compared to 27 countries where it dropped. That's important because the rest of this conversation, we're going to touch a little bit on civil unrest and potentialities for civil war in America, and hopefully get around to our balkanization discussion in the near future, even though we've been talking about it, I think, since the very first fucking podcast we did, how many ever months ago.
Yeah.
We're eventually going to get around to it. It's a pretty loaded topic. We're kind of avoiding it. Plus, there's other shit that's kind of interesting to talk about too.
Yeah.
But anyway, like we saw in Brazil, right? Like how stable is that regime? I mean, he won the election by like a thread, right? I think it was like a fraction of a percent, like just under 1%.
Yeah.
Separated the those two individuals. I want to say it went into a runoff too, and that was the final vote after the runoff. Was like not even a percent separated their vote totals. So like that shows a public that is like severely divided. And I know when I was playing that MMO, and you might recall you stayed out of the world chat, but when they declared Lula da Silva the winner in that election, some fucking people that you were like, oh, you're chill, dude, I like you, they came out and they're like, he fucking eats babies, like he wants to fucking rape and murder everyone, like, and you're like, whoa, what the fuck? I didn't realize that that same kind of like irrational right-wing fanaticism like is not unique to American culture.
No. People eat babies everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, it's fascinating. And it, probably in post-colonial countries, right? Like, or countries built on the colonial experience, right? Which Brazil very much is.
Yeah.
And also they have a long history of living under military dictatorship. And there are some people who wish, I think there's a large faction in that society, if I can generalize, that kind of enjoyed the stability of that. For various reasons, white supremacy, cultural conservatism, they're notorious for not liking their gay and trans people, et cetera, so forth.
You got Carnival and all that stuff.
What was that?
I said, even though you have like Carnival and all that stuff, you suppose they'd appreciate it.
Oh yeah.
It's so flamboyant.
Well, that's a, kind of Mardi Gras, and that they kind of, those kinds of celebrations where you're supposed to be hedonistic, right?
Yeah.
Like you're encouraged to kind of pull your titties out or whatever.
Exactly. I got some beads.
Yeah, for sure, dude. It is what it is. I'm not opposed to letting loose. Rumspringa, right? Or something like that. Is that what it's called? Or the Amish, as they come of age, they kind of have like a period where they're encouraged to experience the world, so that they come into living their lifestyle.
And I mean, in that instance, the hope is that they're so unprepared for it that it'll frighten them back.
Right. And it's also about like, hey, you need to choose this. It's not being imposed upon you. Beyond, of course, you've been conditioned that this is normal for most of your entire life up to this point. but we still want you to choose this, right? Like,
Yeah. The
I'm not
non-choice
Amish. I'm
choice.
not criticizing the Amish. I actually like them very much. And I think they're prepared in a way most Americans aren't
Yeah.
because they haven't bought into industrial society. Of course, they interact with these supply chains too. It's not to say they're, 100% like off-grid technophobic. Like they do
Right.
use a lot of technologies, use the market system to provide incomes for themselves and to be able to purchase things in the market. But largely their day-to-day existence, they've kind of chosen not to integrate with higher forms of technology that are dependent on complex systems like energy and global food production
Yeah.
and all of these things that are breaking down, which are causing civil unrest. What do you think about that?
The Amish?
No, just
Cool
generally,
dudes.
like
Oh,
their ability to weather these kinds of storms that we're talking about causing civil unrest and
yeah.
serious problems.
I mean, my experience is that they don't really, put uh, too much effort into, getting out there and being on the internet all the time and making their lives wholly dependent upon like worldwide sales and whatnot. When they do sell products such as furniture, butter, etc., it's all on a pretty local scale,
Mhm.
and that helps to insulate them from any like worldwide failings that might happen. They don't need to get their supplies from somewhere else in order to build what it is they're building or make what it is they're making. They get it locally, and then they sell locally as well. So if the US puts embargoes on some country, they don't give a shit because it's not going to affect them. They're not selling to that country. Now, if all of a sudden, Pennsylvania said, hey, we're going to make it so you have to pay a tariff to trade with New York, they might have some troubles, but that's about it.
Right, and of course, in the United States, the interstate commerce is federal jurisdiction. So
Yeah, you're not allowed to restrict it.
that is not possible at this point. Although I
Yeah,
did choose not to include a video of a guy talking about potential civil war, and he was talking about states ignoring federal preemption and stuff like that as an
they're trying.
indicator.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing is you have all the time certain states trying to, oftentimes I think without even realizing it, trying to circumvent those laws. Or you'll have, like, I see places, that are like, oh, we do not accept pennies or we do not accept certain types of cash. And I'm like, that's illegal.
It
Like,
is.
this is legal tender. You must accept it. You might not like accepting it, but you must. And if I felt like coming down on you with a hammer, I absolutely could just call up, my local representative and be like, hey, this place is not accepting my cash. Like,
Right.
do something about that.
Right.
But
Yeah, 100%.
and
Right.
you have where New York was saying like, we want to become cashless and et cetera, and the federal government had to come down on them and just be like, you can't do that, like, because you have to accept our cash, and then on top of that, it disproportionately affects people that are unbanked.
Right. Exactly. Let's get through the rest of this article. Okay, so I read that one. See, compared to 27 countries where it dropped. So this is the risk of having governments challenged. The analysis says that although the negative trend is less marked than for civil unrest, rising food and energy prices will make it more difficult for governments to manage popular discontent.
Oh, yeah.
Over the coming months, the firm is now warning governments across the world are about to get an answer to a burning question. Will protests sparked by socioeconomic pressure transform into broader and more disruptive anti-government action? What is your answer to that question?
Yes. Inevitably. I mean, like,
Yeah.
we living in California, you get, if you every time you go to pay your electric bill, there's a little warning, that says like, hey, PG&E has the right to shut off your power at any given moment if we're worried that weather conditions might cause danger to our grid. And so, like, something that we used to take pretty much for granted was that we'd have electricity to cool our food and cook our food. Now we're being told like, maybe that's not such a guarantee as you thought it was, and if there's gusty wind, we might just shut that down so that there's not a fire that sparks and spreads. Um, in terms of like food, you currently have egg prices going nuts due to like 5% of hens dying off due to bird flu. And then they're also like, oh yeah, well, we need to protect the, like at Costco, it used to be all cardboard packaging, and now they have a plastic covering over the top layer to protect the eggs. And my assumption is that they were losing too many eggs when eggs are scarce, and so they added in a little bit of cost by putting in that plastic and protective cover. And so all these factors are making eggs more expensive. So food's harder to get. Eggs are a staple for most people. Whether you're eating a plain or making cookies or whatever, like, and like I was saying with the flour and stuff like that, that could very easily like turn pretty bad with just like one bad winter. So I mean,
100%. Or a warm, or say it's fucking the Midwest and the Great Plains are just soggy the whole planting season. And that's what I mean about seasonality. And we've talked about how climate change is going to disrupt all that shit.
And all the famines throughout the years have shown us that it only takes one bad year, and you can save up as much grain and etc. as you want to try and offset that, but like you're immediately pulling from those reserves, and they're only going to last for so long.
Right. And the whole nuclear winter debate, even though they've a lot of research recently has kind of been like, it's not going to be 10 years of no sunlight kind of thing.
Right.
But most of the research still says mass fucking famine, because there will be crop production affected. And on top of that, governments are going to, like I mentioned about the droughts in the around 2010 that caused those governments to be like, we cannot export as much as we had in previous years because we need to keep some in reserve. That process would also happen, exacerbating kind of instability in regional climates and the ability for producers to produce.
In areas that are food poor, they're suddenly going from barely getting by to not getting by at all. I think one of our later videos is going to talk about that. And so, I mean, you basically just have areas that need imports without those imports, and people will only stand for no food for so long. Like you can make your entertainment prohibitively expensive, and people will just do without. But the moment you start threatening food and water, people are going to fucking cry.
Yeah, and it's the rule of threes, right? 3 minutes. You can't go more than really realistically more than 3 minutes without air. 3 hours without regulating your body heat. 3 days
without water.
3 weeks without food.
Yep.
But don't tell any of these people they're not going to wait till fucking 2.5 weeks down the road before they start fucking breaking some shit. And maybe murdering some rich people and fighting cops who are trying to like protect the one grocery store that has shit and has 3-4 times the prices for everything. And they're going to stand there and shoot people to protect the profits of the grocery store or whatever, right?
I mean, hell, we have cops, guarding Walmart in Fresno. So I mean, we're already halfway there,
right? Yeah, I think that's in every smallish, or actually, probably every community, small and large, that a Walmart exists in, is that the public there. Not only do they pay very little in taxes, only the sales taxes that people pay, sometimes business licensing, but the way that business licenses, at least in my town, are structured, like Walmart gives as much as like, a large restaurant downtown in tax revenues to the city. But then the city more or less has to keep an officer parked outside of Walmart 12 hours a fucking day, which
they can't afford to hire a fucking
$140,000 a year in salary and benefits.
Yeah. And all because Walmart can't be bothered to hire a security guard.
I mean, they do have their what do they call them, loss prevention or whatever.
That's different. They won't chase someone.
Pass that person that they detain off to authorities for prosecution or whatever.
Yeah, and What's sad about that is that Walmart caused a lot of the desperation that leads to people stealing in the first place.
I never understood why Walmart was such a popular place to fucking steal from.
Well, especially given steal from, uh, steal from, I don't know. I mean, their food prices really aren't all that great. Like we were there for some some prescription drugs, and we're looking at prices, and they're like 2 cents less than some of the other places. Like, we're cheaper. It's only 2 cents, but we're cheaper.
Yeah, and then you have to think about it. Is it 2 cents
Supporting
or
Walmart.
whatever, or even like $10 worth
Yeah,
the experience of not like having to drive around to find a parking spot and then like bumping into people trying to get through a door and then just
yeah.
being in a Walmart? It's just like, I don't know. I don't go to Walmart often, actually at all, since I've lived in Chico. Actually, I went in there after the campfire when I was helping with the encampment that
Mhm.
was in the lot next door to the Walmart. I did go into Walmart to pick up I think it was like a fucking hammer or something we needed to like for setting our tent anchors.
It's
So
just too
like,
convenient.
yeah, so I did go into the Walmart in Chico once. Let's move on to the next topic.
Do you
So right
believe
now
that's
we
still
have a
you?
good picture of what's happening, food and energy prices. Um, gonna happen. We'll have a video in the description to the TRT roundtable. I guess it's like Turkish state TV, but it feels a lot like the BBC.
Yeah.
Um, the dude, the main anchor and the show that I had, the clip that I had had a British accent. And they talk a lot about European economic and energy news. And it was interesting. So check that out in the show notes, but we're excluding that here. But suffice to say, energy prices, especially in Europe, but globally, are also going to cause unrest. You know,
Yeah, yeah. And I
Queue up our next one. What do we got?
think that's you for the Carnegie Endowment, which is
Okay,
a
then I will share
pretty
the
cool
tab
site.
instead. You got it?
Yeah.
Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Of course, this is a capitalist
Can you close out the
funded
cookie
think
notice?
tank. But I want to like highlight some of these interesting tools, right? There's another and tools and white papers and other sources of information, because one thing that kind of prompted us to start this podcast was seeing so many people in this space talking about things that they didn't really understand and never encouraging other people to learn more about it. We're just going to sit here and talk about something we don't really understand and then move on tomorrow. So I think it's really important that we teach people to teach themselves. Because if you know where to find information, you don't need anybody to tell you where what is truth.
You
And
should
this
still
is,
like and subscribe, though.
yeah, still like and subscribe, of course,
Yeah.
but that's more to just hang out, right?
Yeah.
And you think about like the printing press, right? In the broad historical pattern, right? The printing press, and they printed a shit ton of Bibles, and then all of a sudden, the fucking Catholic Church lost its fucking monopoly. Because people be like,
Yeah.
I don't need to go and have the pastor or whatever they fucking call him in Catholicism, have him tell me what the Bible says in Latin, because I can fucking read that shit myself,
In
right?
English
When you
or
had the
whatever your language
Protestant
is.
Reformation and the Catholic Church, its influence was severely diminished, and then
Oh, yeah.
Europe fought a bunch of fucking wars over it, et cetera, so forth. Sorry, I think you were trying to say something.
Oh, I was just going to say, it allowed it to be translated into a bunch of different languages and allowed your peasantry to get a firsthand view. And they found out, that Jesus was a socialist.
I'm not sure if that was the primary takeaway, unfortunately. That would have been cool though, right? We start printing Bibles and handing them out and be like, shit. And then it's just like, yeah, Monty Python. It's like, we're an autonomous collective. Yeah, and the absolute democratization of society. because fucking Jesus washed the hooker's feet or whatever.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Let's see. So this is just a tool I wanted to point out. Let's see, since 2017.
Can you click
This I
X
think is when they started collecting data.
near the bottom of the screen? You click X to make the cookie policy notice go away. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, since 2017, I think that's when they started collecting data. Most recently updated just a handful of days ago, last week. You have 400 significant protests, 132 countries out of the 198, right? So that's most of them, or at least a plurality. And almost 1 in 4 lasted more than a few months.
Jeez.
And then they have this kind of cool interactive tool. And you can click on a country and see various events that have happened. Or you can scroll here. And what you do when you click a country here is it narrows this list down. But you can scroll. So you got anti-Taliban protests. Okay, that's political. Electoral protests. Commander Sword protests I hadn't heard of. You can also see the peak size here, right? Maybe I hadn't heard of it because it was just a few hundred people, less than 1,000, right?
Yeah.
Lasted a week. So that's kind of like a demonstration, right? Rising price protests, police violence protests, election protests, Kirchner prosecution protests. I'm not sure what that is, but I'm sure Kirchner was probably like a political prisoner of some kind. IMF deal, coronavirus lockdown, austerity protests, peace plan. Now, Argentina, Peru, all these places in Latin America have been kind of experiencing these kinds of things for various reasons. A lot of it's like CIA ops and shit, of course. Coronavirus restriction protests, racial equality protests in Australia.
God damn.
Yeah. And you see Australia.
Nowhere is immune except for Greenland.
Yeah. And so you have a lot of these in the West. You see the coronavirus lockdowns as like a much more frequent reason that people were taking the street. You see Bangladesh, you got anti-government. Okay, of course. Yeah, sure. Fuel price hikes, anti-rape protests, right? Which are, I would put in like the realm of like social issues. What do they call them? Political, but kind of like feminist movements and women's equality kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Student murder protests, blasphemy protests. Hadn't heard of that. I'll have to look that up. Look, that doesn't have a tag.
Corruption.
Then you have labor, right? Garment workers, road safety, like all these things people are protesting. I mean, that's 15,000 people is not a lot, right?
It can be, depends on where you put them.
Election, census, political arrests. You have movements for murdered people, right? Like Justice for David, I'm guessing, is similar to like George Floyd, right?
Yep.
More coronavirus and et cetera, so forth. You can do this, right? Subway fare protests.
I think what's interesting too is if you look at the map, any of the white areas have experienced no recorded protests.
Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. Well, that's just because they were probably brutally put down. But yeah. If you look at like, Northern Europe, you got like Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Latvia, Estonia. They're cool. Go move there. Apparently they're doing
Why do
something
they have
right in
no
those areas.
data on the Republic of Ireland? I thought they were protesting like abortion.
I don't know. I hadn't heard about that. I wonder if it's wrapped up in. No, it could be the United Kingdom. It all gets wrapped up in there.
No, the United Kingdom is in that map is Northern Ireland. It's just that little blue dot up there.
Oh, you know how you said the Justice for David one? If you click on the plus sign, it expands it and tells you what it is.
Oh, no shit.
Yeah. So, like, let's see. For the United Kingdom, there's a March for Mummies that caught my eye, and it is a high and increasing cost of childcare. And so, a bunch of women went out there and fucking protested, and the outcome: no policy or leadership change. Tells you the trigger, the motivation, who the key participants were, and what the outcome was.
And you have like Nicaragua. More than 100,000 people participated in social security reform protests.
Nice. Get out there.
Violent repression of initial protests and broader democratic backslide.
Oof.
That makes sense,
Not so
right?
good.
Because Occupy Wall Street did that, where like it blew up after the NYPD overreacted.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Business sector. Interesting that they're a participant.
I mean, if people have
Revoke
more money, they
changes
could
to
buy more
protest
shit.
and stop. What's that?
Oh, if people have more money, they could buy more shit. I mean, if I'm a small business, I want taxes on billionaires because then people can have more money to spend at my small business.
Yeah, so I encourage everybody to go through this and look at what's happening and what's causing people to protest. See, this was just a few hundred people.
I mean, if nothing else, it tells you that you're not alone. Like I think a lot of times, people get the impression that their problems are, if not unique, they're not common. And you can sort by size and status and all this stuff, and you can find out that a lot of different places are going through a lot of the same problems as we are. So
100%. And that's why I brought this here. I mean, we were talking, one of our first podcasts, we talked about intellectual property and John Deere. They did reach a settlement, and now they have, the reason they reached the settlement is to get federal preemption. So now like people can repair John Deere and get access to code or whatever they need to fix their tractors in exchange for not having a state by state right to repair. They were trying to avoid having right to repair being codified in various state laws so that the legal landscape is amenable to corporate greed.
great.
So they gave a small concession in that. And I can't help but think of in India, and this was much more prevalent a couple decades ago, where the farmers, they were getting these GMO Terminator seeds. I forget the name of the movement. But a lot of them were like fucking committing suicide by like drinking fucking pesticides and shit.
Oh.
No, like mass. When I say like
Yeah.
hundreds of thousands, if I'm not mistaken, at least tens of thousands of farmers killed themselves by drinking pesticides because like the Green Revolution basically destroyed the agricultural system in India and in favor of big ag.
India goes
It
hard
destroyed
when
the
it comes
folk
to protests.
Sorry, go ahead.
I said India goes hard when it comes to protesting.
They do. And we're going to talk a little bit about that towards the end. But I thought this was interesting in Peru. Farm protests. Not many people participated, but like, look at what they wanted. Like, oh, the government's going to like give tax benefits to companies that export, but that ultimately led to cuts in labor rights and wages for farmers. And then the motivation, anger over rights of big companies being prioritized over the rights of workers who were receiving low salaries. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm saying, imagine that. It turns out people all over the world are pissed about the fact that businesses get preferential treatment over the people that literally form the country that gave the government this power.
Right. Yeah, and it's just interesting because, like, I think of like the convoys and the trucker protests, and they're like, "Oh, you're not gonna do your agenda 2030 on us. You're not gonna." Whatever they fucking say, right? Like, you're not gonna like force us to like wear masks. Right. And then these people are like, bro, I just want to feed my fucking family.
I want more than $11 a day.
Right. And the thing is that there are a lot of people upset about these issues too, right?
Yeah. Another interesting thing.
Most labor struggles are probably similar to this, right?
Yeah. If you scroll up a bit, if you can search for keywords.
We can, right?
Yeah. And so I typed in abortion, and you get 6, 7, 8 different, it looks like, countries that had protests for it. I mean, so you could search in anything you want. Farm.
I screwed it up.
Yeah.
Abortion access protests in Croatia, Hungary, Italy.
Yep, it's all over the place.
And so, right, and you look at this, okay, key participants, women, of course. Yeah, so that's just like a right-wing party getting elected. And when I say right-wing, this was, last year, fucking openly fascist.
Which we have covered. Yeah.
Which we've covered. Got elected. And so, of course, they went out and were like, They're just kind of letting their presence be known. But look at this, more than 1,000, but it doesn't give a better number than that.
Yeah.
Malta, Morocco. I remember these in Poland. I do remember this in Poland. And I think it overturned, right? Oh, and it said no policy change. Interesting. I thought that they won.
I mean, ultimately, that seems to be the biggest result is nothing changes because governments don't feel like they need to change because we're not taking appropriate or sizable enough action, I guess.
I think these numbers are suspect.
I mean,
I'm going to have to look at their methodology.
Yeah. Oh, that was basically what I was going to say is, methodology, who's paying for it, and so on.
Yeah, because I know that I live in a town of 100. I think they estimate a population of about 110 now. And I should actually know that number because the census data has been released. But at any rate, just in our community, there were several hundred. And I imagine that those took place in cities all across the country. I know they happened all across the country. And I have that 10,000 is it says greater than 10,000.
Right.
But like 100,000? Because if it's 100,000, greater than 10,000 is
yeah, you kind of wonder like what their increments are.
Yeah.
Because like some of them will say 20,000 and they say it like matter of factually, like just 20,000, not right there.
Yeah, exactly.
Not 20,042. No, just 20,000. 101,475 people in Chico as of the last census.
105?
101.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Is that from the 2020 census or is that the estimate for 2023?
2020, yeah.
Okay, yeah. I think the estimates I saw were in a government document from late last year.
Okay.
Just a few months ago.
I mean, it makes sense. More people had to move to the area because a lot of shit got burnt down and all the jobs are there.
Yeah, and the 2020 census would have captured some of those people.
Right.
But the city's just growing so fast, which I think I've mentioned before. Like everybody's like, oh, this is not the Chico that I grew up in. It's like, no, you realize that the population growth for the city's been like 15, 20%, like year after year.
Why do people expect things to stay the same? Like the rule of the universe is change. Like of course it's different than when you grew up. Fucking, it's been 50 years, you old fart.
Let's move on. Everybody check this fucking tool out.
I like it, and it has been bookmarked, and I will be following up on some of this
just
stuff.
dicking around.
Yeah.
Where are the proteins? And we've only been collecting data since 2017. So
right before we started the show, we talked about falling down the rabbit hole. Here's a good rabbit hole to fall down.
Here's a big ass. It's
like a sinkhole caused by
chupacabra. Then get in there.
The sinkhole caused by fucking permafrost melting.
Right. Let us move on.
Yeah, we're gonna go and watch a video from The Economist about food supplies.
Imagine if you were buying your food from Ukraine.
Nope. Why is that doubling up? Is that me?
Of course, here in the disclaimer, everything we show, we believe we have, and we will make an argument to the case that we have any use of other people's sources or material is covered under the fair use doctrine of U.S. copyright law.
Yes, indeed.
And we have one. When we did have a copyright, they tried to copyright strike us, and we're like, fuck that, and wrote like a whole brief of why we were under fair use, and it took a couple weeks, but eventually they capitulated.
Yep.
Now,
why am I getting a duplicate sound here? Sorry.
Oh, you're fine.
That hasn't happened in a long time. Why is it happening now? I've got my feed over here turned off. It shouldn't be happening. Very strange. Well, I could probably survive. Do you hear it doubled up?
No.
Okay.
Let's say you need to go to Canada or Australia or Argentina. That means that you will have to pay more because of extra freight. and you will have to pay more in time because it will take you longer, and you will pass these costs to the consumer.
And other shocks have made the crisis worse.
We are in uncharted territory because not only do we have a food crisis with multiple causes, but also this is coming on top of an energy crisis and also a fertilizer crisis.
Farms run on fuel and fertilizer. As prices of both have risen, farmers' profit margins have been squeezed. And if they're forced to cut back on fertilizer because it's too expensive or unavailable, their yields will fall even more, at the worst possible time.
That will impact the production of major commodities for the next year. And then we are looking at an availability crisis. Imagine what that would do to food prices.
So, what was the point in bringing this clip up? Well, I think it's really important to center food, because ultimately, as I like to constantly remind people I interact with in like online lefty spaces, like hungry people are dangerous people. And as you're muted. As I said before, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to keep talking.
You're good.
But at any rate, like, even though you have 3 weeks before you die, like, generally speaking, it's if you miss more than a few meals, fuck, bro. If I'm kind of hungry when I go to bed, say I ate like a lighter dinner earlier in the evening or something, and I go to bed and I'm like, ooh, I could have a snack, but I'm going to bed, so I'm just going to go to bed, right?
Mhm.
When I wake up in the morning, it's like hangry is a thing. Would you agree?
Yes, because I know you.
And you know me, and
You
I
are the
get
ultimate
fucking hangry.
hangry person. Yes. I forget. I was talking to somebody about you, and I was like, "Yeah, just make sure you keep him fed." It was actually in the game. You know, they're like, "Oh, he's a nice guy," and I'm like, "Unless he doesn't have food." Then he's a bit insufferable.
Yeah,
Just keep
but
him
I
full
mean,
of pancakes. She'll
hangry
be
is
all
the
right.
thing, dude. And like, I might, even if it's just like breakfast, right? Breaking the fast, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
if
That
I'm
is a
kind of
word.
hungry when I go to bed, and then I sleep for 7-8 hours, and I wake up, and then like dealing with like, hey, we planned on going out to breakfast. I don't understand why I've been awake for 2.5 hours, and we have not even gone to the place that we planned to eat at the day before, and then we have to wait an hour when we get there. Like, this doesn't fucking work for me.
Yeah.
Like, I need to eat. And so basically we're in the habit of like, if it's going to be more than like a half hour for breakfast, like I'll either make like a half a piece of toast, or like we have a jar of like trail mix that we keep on the counter, and I'll just take a handful of trail mix, and that'll,
It works.
give me an hour worth of fuel or whatever.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
like part of that too, at least in my experience, is that it's physically painful on the tum tum to not have a food in it. Like your stomach is constantly trying to digest itself. You have a whole system that is dedicated to keeping your stomach tissues coated in mucus so that doesn't happen. And when you don't have anything in your stomach, all your stomach acid goes doubly to work on your stomach itself. And so,
I'd never heard that, but I mean, I know that like hunger is a thing, right? And your body will like, eventually start to eat itself if you don't eat, right?
yeah,
Like it'll start eating. First, it eats fat because that's your store,
I mean,
right?
yeah,
And
there's
then it'll
entire
start to
diets
eat your
based around that.
muscle. What's that?
Well, there's entire diets based around that idea.
Yeah.
That it'll eat fats or fats first.
Yeah, dude, it's beyond the scope of this, but there's a Guinness Book where I saw a TikTok on YouTube thing about the Guinness Book of World Records holder for longest fast.
Mhm.
This dude didn't eat for fucking almost an entire calendar year. It was like 340 days.
That's
And it was because
insane.
he was like 400 or 500 pounds, and he did it
Oh,
with
okay, yeah,
medical
yeah.
supervision.
Right, yeah.
And so he had like tea and coffee and black coffee
Mhm.
and a couple other things. He did multivitamins, right? And
Correct.
water. And he went to the doctor to check in like every other week. And he monitored himself. I think he did a couple tests at home to monitor himself every single day or multiple times a day.
Yeah.
His fucking body just fucking fed on the fat store.
Yeah.
That's fucking wild, bro. Almost a whole fucking year.
I don't think I could survive a year, but I could survive probably a couple months.
Yeah. Which is good, man, because when shit hits the fan,
I'm going to need this.
yeah, you're going to need that. That's what's going to separate you from all these fucking skinny gym rats. Their fucking body's going to go straight to eating that fucking muscle.
Oh, yeah. Well, and the thing is, like, all these people that are just like, cut, like their body is like 2,000 calories. Ha, laughable. They're like 3, 4, 5,000.
Yeah, exactly. They're all creating a body that requires more food to sustain.
Yeah.
Which is not to fucking talk.
That's not sustainable.
Like, we are not the poster children for fucking health, right? Like,
or even, not having excessive calories. We just go the other way.
Yeah.
We don't do the exercise and we eat more food than we eat.
Yeah, I get pretty decent exercise most times, but it's been so goddamn wet. It looks like there might be blue sky outside right now, but generally speaking, the last fucking, what has it been, bro? Like since the middle of December, it just like hasn't stopped raining. Was that 4 or 5 weeks?
Which is great. Let's not complain about that. We need that rain.
No, but I mean, as far as like my primary exercise being
going outside,
manual labor.
Yeah.
I don't do gyms.
No.
Gyms are not my thing. No. Let us move on.
All right.
There's a second half to this, right?
Second half, yeah.
Cool.
Tunisia usually imports about 42% of its wheat from Ukraine and relies on it for sunflower oil, another crucial commodity. With those imports gone, Tunisia has struggled to find other suppliers it can afford, meaning shortages for people like Suad.
قبل أسهل في كل شيء وكل شيء خير موجود وكل شيء لا تلقى الواحد تو يمشي يدخل داره ما تلقاش حتى مغرفة زين.
In Tunisia, hunger is turning to anger. As food disappears from shelves, there's a risk Tunisians could lose patience with their government.
I'm really, really concerned about how this...
What's up?
I had said pause several times.
Oh, sorry.
And I don't think you were hearing me. That's okay. I don't really want to dwell on this too much because I also want to, even though if we can win a copyright claim, I'd rather avoid one.
Gotcha.
And The Economist seems like a place that might do that. Same with ABC coming up. We have a clip from ABC.
Yeah.
But they mentioned sunflower oil and how they get the oil in North Africa from Ukraine. Interestingly enough, when I was doing mobile air traffic control for the U.S. Forest Service a number of years ago, we would always go out to dinner because it was for the guy I worked for. He just wanted to shelter as much of it from taxes. So like we lived high on the hog when we were working because he's like, no, well, just business expenses. So we get to go out and eat steak and drink beer every single night, right? Like because he was just trying to burn money and enjoy himself on what's essentially a tax write-off, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, at one of the bars or whatever we went to, I think it was like a microbrewery in Etna. I forget the name of it. Up there in the north west corner of the state, north central, I guess. Anyway, talking to him, he was in that valley because in that valley they grow sunflower for seed. He worked for Syngenta, which is one of the big biotech firms growing GMO sunflowers. And then the sunflowers harvested there were seed that they then shipped for the following season in Ukraine. So they had field trials.
Right.
And they were just contracted farmers who grew seed on behalf of Syngenta. And then Syngenta owned it. They just contracted the farmer to grow it. And then they shipped it and sold it to Ukraine. So when this came up, I was like, oh yeah, that doesn't just affect people eating in Tunisia. I mean, that's probably the more important suffering, right? Poor people in poor countries, right?
Right.
But because we have an interconnected global system, like maybe Ukraine isn't stable enough to purchase seed. And now you have a farmer in California, or not a farmer, several farmers in California whose entire income is based on seed exports.
Right.
And now they're out. And so what are they going to do? They're going to fucking be like, oh shit, I better do something else. And then they shift. And I heard a very interesting discussion. Sorry, did you want to jump in real quick?
Oh no, I was. Why would they not be able to, if they're growing the sunflower seeds in that area? Why can't they just utilize the seeds from the previous harvest?
They're growing on behalf of Syngenta, which is contracted
Oh.
for them to grow it with the explicit purpose of export.
Okay.
Yeah. So they're just a seed farmer.
Okay.
And they're on contract because Syngenta they're a biotech company, so they own those seeds.
Oh, fantastic.
Right. And they're doing the monitoring and et cetera, so forth. So it's not like you can buy seed from us. It's not like they're going out into the market, buying seed, growing a crop, and then so they have more seed and then exporting that.
Right.
No,
Gotcha.
they're growing as a contract grower for the person who owns the seed from probably until it's sold in the Ukraine or elsewhere, right?
Mhm.
Or potentially they're using contract farmers and they own all of it until it's sent to the oil press.
Gotcha. Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, it really depends. And I don't know the details of that, but that's how I picture it in my head. The gentleman I worked for that worked for Syngenta said those are contract farmers growing Syngenta seed for export to Ukraine
Gotcha.
and
Okay.
Eastern Europe. Yeah. And so he might shift gears, right? Those farmers might be like, well, fuck, I've been growing sunflower seed for export for Syngenta for 10, 15 years. Now what do I do? Because Syngenta's like not coming back to me to renew a contract because they can't sell the seed because Ukraine's a fucking war zone, right? And I saw an interesting article, or interesting video rather, discussing, and I wanted to include it in some discussion here today, but it really just didn't work. And the guy was fucking brilliant, but like not a good clip to use here. He just was talking really fast and his voice was really low and it's hard to hear. Anyway, he was talking about supply chain disruptions and how we're like, oh God, the war in Ukraine, they keep pointing to that. No, he said you can trace supply chain disruptions back to Trump's tariffs. And I was like, really?
Seems reasonable.
It does seem reasonable, right? Yeah. We knew that it would have economic follow-on effects. But in all discussions of supply chain, you hear greedy shipping companies and this, that, and the other thing. And, underpaid truckers and all of this stuff so that they're not, things aren't moving through ports. Pete Buttigieg, Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg is fucking incompetent. I'm not going to deny that. But how much of, and he certainly has control, the power to deal with some of this. But I'm just saying that you hear all of these various different things. And this is the first time I heard, oh no, you can trace it directly back to Trump's tariffs. And the argument was because, we slapped tariffs on like appliances and stuff and solar panels and stuff coming out of China. So China said, we're not going to buy fucking soybeans as retaliation, not going to buy soybeans from you. Yeah. We're going to buy them from Brazil, who also grows a lot of soybeans. Okay. And then because like the ports and the whole shipping warehousing infrastructure basically had to be changed, like new linkages were made and this, that, and the other thing. And anyway, it was a really compelling argument that basically like the whole thing reshuffled. And then when the trade regime or tariff regime changes again, it doesn't just go back to normal.
Right.
And so there's this like fundamental breakage in these flows of goods.
Well, and as a species, we're just absolutely terrible at seeing something happening and not attributing it to something that is happening at or near the same time. So, I mean, I like that this guy is saying like, oh yeah, this thing that we did 4 years ago is now having an effect today, and we're only just now seeing it. Like, that's the sort of research that I like to see. It's very similar to how Freakonomics they did the whole Roe v. Wade being responsible for a decrease in crime because a whole bunch of unwanted children weren't born, and it didn't go on to lives of crime. It's like that's the sort of like linkages that you don't get your average person thinking about. So yeah, it's,
Yeah, I would be interested in reading their.
oh, have you not read Freakonomics?
No.
Oh, I think they actually have it in video form as well on
Yeah, I'll check
Netflix.
it out. I'd be
Yeah, it's pretty
interested
good.
in their logical process
Yeah,
to
yeah.
getting there. And because they're not born, therefore they cannot commit crime seems a bit deterministic. That if they were born, they would have committed crime. But
They have a bunch of research on like where births were lessened and where crime was highest, and it all overlaps.
yeah,
It may very well be correlation and not causation, but they have a compelling argument.
yeah, that's why I'm interested in looking at how they lay out their argument, because
Yeah.
you could be like, okay, cool, you provided the evidence, and I could see how you drew that conclusion.
Yeah.
At any rate, we are moving on from The Economist, right? So now we
Yes.
have energy.
Uncool.
Check out that article in the show notes to discuss the European energy crisis. We talked about that a bit before when we were talking about the Nord Stream 2 pipeline and this, that, and the other thing, right? And how follow the money. US is going to get or US liquid natural gas exporters are probably going to make a lot of money from it.
Mhm.
But generally speaking, Europe has been is faced with probably several years of energy shortages and price increases. And our entire society is built on fossil fuels. And on that TRT roundtable, which you can find in the link, and then go to their YouTube page and explore their content. But I mean, our whole society, our industrial society, is built on fossil fuels, and we're in an era like this is where it really starts to tighten its grip.
Yeah.
Is because we've had declining returns on our infrastructure, et cetera, so forth. Some of that, of course, is financial, right? There are in every system, there are delays from it's not a light switch you turn on and the light is so fast that you don't notice the actual delay in that system, right? Because there is a delay between flipping the switch and there. It's just so fast you don't fucking see it.
Yeah.
But in a system like global energy markets, there is significant lag between finance going through to drill a well, to pump it out, and then it depletes really fast. Finance is moving around. Then they're looking at it's speculative as well. So they're looking at future. Well, we think we're going to sell less natural gas next year. So we're going to loan less money for exploring natural gas because we won't make money off. It's a whole complicated system. So it's not strictly depletion. Although the general trend in global fossil energy is a decline in reserves and an increasing cost to extract enough. Therefore, we can probably keep industrial society limping along for a very long time. However, our entire global financial institutions are dependent on debt-based money. And so if we can't use energy to get more growth, then our entire financial system is incapable of functioning because it's built on this premise that if we loan, you can pay back with interest, and the only way to continue to do that is to continue growing, so that then the banks can harvest that surplus off as their interest.
Right? It doesn't even really exist. It has to be wished into existence. Yeah,
right. It's a crazy fucking system, but it means a lot for our day-to-day existence.
Oh, that definitely means a lot for the day-to-day existence. If the financial system fails, it makes it much harder for an industrial society to limp along because we've integrated the two so well. The finance and the tech are just one and the same now. It's almost impossible to extract them.
Right. And a lot of people ignore basic things. I have a book on my shelf by Dmitry Orlov called The 5 Stages of Collapse. It's really fascinating. And he was a big thinker in that space in the early 20 teens. And I think since decided to kind of retreat and not be a public intellectual because it's a lot of pressure. And
nowadays you get death threats, I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely. He was getting them back then too. Anyway, one of the things he talks about financial collapse is one of the stages. something that I had never really spent much time in because I didn't study business, right? Like I'm sure people who study business and finance, etc., were like, oh yeah, no shit. But like short-term credit, like the Orkin man who comes and sprays people who don't like fucking normal insects like cockroaches and pill bugs and stuff.
Mhm.
They pay someone to come out and spray to get rid of those so they can manicure their perfect, what they think is a sterile environment, completely devoid of nature because nature is the enemy, right? Or whatever their thought process is. They call the Orkin man. Well, the Orkin man has to have the chemicals on hand to go do the job, but so he basically needs a line of credit. So he takes money, or in this case, inventory, right? And goes and does this job expecting that it will make a return to replace the inventory or to pay the creditor, right? And so short-term credit, like groceries, for example, like the grocery store has to put up the money for the food before it ever gets on the shelf and they can sell it, right? There is this delay between acquiring something as a business and then selling it and making your money.
Right.
And so it's in that short term that like short-term credit is incredibly important to facilitating those transactions, right? And without a functioning financial system, you don't get short-term credit. And without short-term credit, businesses don't operate. Even like, these like the Orkin man in the Safeway, right?
Yeah.
And so that's one of those things that like often gets overlooked. That's, a pretty big risk factor as we move forward in the future with our shaky financial system that is going to continue to be unstable or show increased instability because of global energy markets.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just growing food without, fertilizer is pretty much impossible. So
Right. Yeah, exactly. And most
that
of
all
our
requires
fertilizers
energy.
come from fossil fuels.
Yeah. Yeah.
And all of our implements are powered by fossil fuels.
Yeah.
And every implement is shipped via fossil fuels. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a particular implement that I really don't like, and that is the leaf blower. I do not understand the leaf blower. I've watched people leaf blow water before. Like, what the fuck are you? Get a rake, man. You'll be done in half the time.
Across the street, they use a leaf blower, and I'm like,
Yeah.
you guys redid the landscaping 4 years ago to get rid of all the soil.
Yeah. Yeah.
Put it under plastic, put rock on that. So
Yep.
what does he blow? Like the handful of leaves that blow in from somewhere else.
Yeah. You can
And
literally
it's
get like
just
a little grabber.
the whole parking lot. Some of it's times just to get rid of trash. They just blow it
Yeah.
out in the street.
They don't. Yeah, and that's the thing is they don't even end up picking it up half the time. They're just making
No,
somebody
dude,
else.
they just get paid to go and go through the motions, and
Yeah,
part of the
yeah.
motions is the leaf blowing.
Yeah. If you blow leaves, blow me.
Blow me. All right, let's move on to the next one. What do we got? Amanpour? Christina
Yes.
Amanpour? So this clip,
Is it similar?
moving on. We've talked about like reasons for civil unrest, and we are we're Californians specifically, but we're Americans, and largely speaking from the American perspective, although we try and be cognizant of global happenings and how those affect us and how American policy affects other people around the globe, because we're all on the same rock hurtling through space. Right?
I mean, yeah, unfortunately, and we're pretty stuck here as well.
We are stuck here for
It's
now.
like with some of those billionaires, and what have you thinking?
Yeah, unless Elon Musk saves us. No, I'm just kidding. So anyway, we're going to talk a little bit
Daddy
about
Musk.
the prospects. Sorry, what was that?
I said, yeah, Daddy Musk.
Yeah.
Can't even save
Hey,
Twitter.
man, the Twitter files have been really fucking phenomenal. So as much as he kind of botched his takeover, part of me is like, how much of this is because they were mad? Like the rest of the media was fucking mad that he did that. So then the media narrative becomes, oh, he fucked up.
Yeah.
And he probably did.
Everything I've read says, yeah, he did.
But I'm just like, will history vindicate him? I don't know. I have no fucking stake in that person as an individual. In fact,
and
if I
no
had my
stake in
way,
Twitter.
they'd all be fucking either sent to the gulag or the guillotine, right?
Yeah.
Like I have no fucking love for filthy rich people whatsoever.
Yeah.
But I can't help but think maybe media narratives sometimes are overinflating some of the issues because he threatened their he has openly waged war against their monopoly on information. But now we are talking about civil war and the prospects for civil war in the United States. This is Amanpour and Company. Christina Amanpour, I think is her name, has been a journalist for a very long time. CNN really, I think, made her name reporting on the first Gulf War, among other things, the end of communism in Europe, etc. And so this is a show that's on PBS. I think she might still have a show on CNN, but she also does a show on PBS, and then they put it under their own label on YouTube. And it's good. It's kind of really kind of mainstream content, as you'll see, but they have interesting interviews and conversations, and I find myself watching a lot of their content. They offer pretty sophisticated analyses. Anyway, let's roll.
Or in America, if or when?
I would say it's an if, it's not a when. What we're lucky with is that we have this information. We know that weak democracies are at risk. We know that when we begin to organize ourselves, not along political ideas, but along race and religion, that's when you get in trouble. We also know that full, healthy democracies do not experience civil war. We know what it takes to turn this around. And there's time. But if instead we go in the opposite direction, if we continue to attempt to suppress the vote, if we continue to try to make it harder to vote, to give certain advantages to some parts of the country over other parts of the country, then again, we're going in the wrong direction. That's making our democracy weaker.
Okay, this person's name is Barbara Walter, no S. Clearly not the
No relation.
Barbara Walters, which I just found out she recently died like a few weeks ago.
Oh,
To not much fanfare, I think.
I didn't hear about it. No.
Barbara Walters, everybody knows, is one of the more famous broadcasters probably in U.S. media history.
Yeah.
That was Barbara Walter. She is a political scientist. I forget which university she's out of. She wrote a book on called How Civil War Starts. So she did the media circuit talking about that. She is pretty shit libby. I went into a lot of her stuff trying to find maybe a clip that gathered more of what we were talking about together to discuss. And the more I realized she's really shit libby, and a lot of her research on civil wars was from being embedded with the CIA. And specifically working on projects with the CIA to measure likelihood of civil conflict elsewhere in the world. And I can't help but read that as, oh, you as a political scientist are helping them find like cues or things that might indicate underlying problems so that the CIA can come in and do what it does, which is overthrow governments. Yeah. Interestingly enough, as we move into a discussion about nonviolence, one of the things that keeps coming up as an example is this Rose Revolution in Georgia, the country Georgia in the Caucasus. And the more you dig into that, and you're like, oh, this is a perfect example. No blood was shed at all. It was all peaceful. They all gave fucking cops roses, and then the executive had to resign in shame or whatever. And then you find out that, oh, it was a fucking color revolution, and the CIA was deeply involved in that. And so one of the main examples, one of the primary examples you draw to prove your point that nonviolence like is works is called into question because through and through there were elements of fucking clandestine like US meddling. Right.
I mean, anything that can make us more powerful, we'll absolutely take advantage of.
Right. That was part of they still have not become a full member of NATO, but they've joined a bunch of cooperation agreements. When I was in Afghanistan, one of my fondest chow hall memories was the Georgians that were in the Georgian military, super stocky, dude. Like, I'm not a tall person, They were shorter than me most of the time and rounder than me, which I thought was really interesting considering I was a contractor and they were uniformed soldiers.
Yeah.
I'm like, damn, dude, like you must have pretty low recruiting standards. Anyway, there was a women's combat unit because the women got in the APCs and did kind of security circuits or whatever, right? Drive through town, check on shit, whatever. And they were being like, I didn't know what they were saying because they were speaking their language, but something incredibly sexist. Because I saw this woman who was about my height, broader shoulders than me, and not terribly unattractive either, walk up and fucking, I think if I remember correctly, she knocked his fucking tray out of his hand and like open-handed him across the fucking face. And you're talking about a chow hall with like 500-600 people in it. Whole fucking, you could hear a pin drop. No one fucking did anything. Everything's like, holy shit. And then she started fucking cussing him out. And then all of his friends started laughing. And then like the whole fucking chow hall started talking and like went about his meal. Kind of like in the cantina scene in A New Hope. Remember like everybody stops for a second after Obi-Wan cuts Homie's fucking arm off, or after Han shoots Greedo or whatever. And then they pause and they look and they're like, okay, whatever.
Yeah.
Shit happens, right?
Right back to the cantina music.
But it was kind of like that. But yeah, those Georgians, man. So they've been working with the U.S. military at least since 2008, I want to say. And this color revolution, I want to say, was like 03 or 05 or something. But anyway, she worked embedded with the CIA. And so take that with a grain of salt. But a lot of what she said was like, you often find civil wars more with like ethnic rather than ethno-religious rather than political ideological differences. And I can't help but think, what about Brazil? January 10th or whatever it was in Brazil, and January 6th in the United States, right?
Yeah.
Because those were not, and a lot of the civil unrest we've seen in the United States, you know, like I said, the truck convoys, and all of these like protests, which often turn violent against vaccine mandates, etc., so forth, or even when right-wing elements show up and do things like Charlottesville, right? Like against that Charlottesville, you could make an argument that's ethno-religious, right? Where's your white Christian country, right?
Yeah.
But like the vast majority of other places that where factions have conflicted, it's almost exclusively politically based. And so it was curious what you thought about that argument that like you're much more likely to go to civil war. I mean, maybe more likely is not controversial.
Yeah.
But to say that like you're not at risk unless you see these signs of ethno-religious conflict. I'm curious what you think about that.
I would say not at risk unless you see it. But I mean, at the same time, the example that we have in our own country is very much a religious thing. Like you have people who are, you know, Christian, who are convinced that their political opponents are literal devils, demons eating children, you know, stealing their made up chemicals so that they can, you know, remain eternally, you know, youthful. And so, I mean, that's not a belief that's held by everyone, but like it's definitely a whole lot of Christian fundamentalists who believe that the world, or at least their country, should be run in accordance with their dogmatic doctrine.
Right, but even when you think of like I don't know, man, like I hear way more like kill the communists than I hear kill the non-believers.
I mean, I would,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, but I would almost argue that, you know, people conflate their politics, their religion, and their economists all as one big thing. It's one big identity to them.
Yeah. It's definitely identitarian.
Yeah, and so an assault on any one of those is an assault on basically all three, you know, like, of course, communists eat babies too, and things like that. You know, you have all these weird like crossovers where it's like, oh, communists are evil bastards. You have anyone who isn't religious. How can they possibly be good if they don't have a book telling them to be good? Things of that nature. Where it's just the intersection of politics, a religion, and like economic a belief leads to that sort of behavior. And of course, it makes it easier to have a civil war when you have already dehumanized people on the other side of the aisle. You literally call them and think that they're inhuman, or at least different enough from you that they don't deserve any sort of respect or consideration.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot of othering, which is problematic. But I just kind of like, in a lot of ways, it's like, oh, and stable democracies aren't at risk.
Yeah.
While also implying that the US is immune to that because we're a stable democracy. And I'm like, I don't understand where you can fucking get that information when like public trust in media as an institution, in our political institutions, in our educational institutions, in our medical institutions. There's a reason that people could look at fucking Dr. Fauci and be like, fuck you self-serving piece of shit, because none of us trust the medical system because it's for profit and it has been fucking people over for decades.
Right.
So and when you have, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to agree that you do have a complete lack of trust in all the primary institutions that are supposed to make you feel safe, make you feel like, the government is working on your behalf. And trust is at an all-time low for all of them. I mean, and it's not just, oh, I'm on the right wing of politics, and so I distrust, this part of the government. No, you have people on all parts of the political spectrum who don't even like, in some instances, the group that associates closest to them. Like, I don't like the fucking Democrats, and that's probably the closest thing that I am as a Democrat. But I don't like them. They're not just as bad as some of the Republicans, but they're not great. And so I'm just like, I mean, maybe if they did more for me and more for the people that I cared about, which is pretty much everybody, then I'd actually be impressed with them. But it's like you said, medical care is for profit. And if you don't change that shit and make it so that it's guaranteed for everyone, I don't like you. Like, I'm going to have a hard time agreeing with any policies that you come up with or wanting to vote for you. Because you're basically saying that certain people, basically the poor, don't deserve to live. Fuck you.
That's exactly what they're saying. Or that, and it's just designed to extract profit, right, from public institutions. And so when you have such little institutional trust across the political spectrum, across ideologies, like, it's goddamn near universal that Americans fucking don't trust any of it. And most participation is symbolic, right? Or because we don't know what else to do.
We vote because we're told it matters. But there's the famous quote that if voting did anything, it would be illegal.
Right. But then at the same time, if it didn't matter, then why would they engage in voter suppression, among other things?
Right.
I mean, I think it matters. I don't think it matters as much as we think it does.
I think,
or we're told it does.
I think their goals are easier to attain if voting doesn't matter. And so that's a good reason to suppress it, is you can get to your end goal much faster if you can suppress the vote. And apparently they're just too impatient. And the thing is, like, if you just exercised a little bit of patience and continued to slowly erode a democracy, as has been done over the several hundred years since our country was founded, people wouldn't even notice for the most part. Like, how the House of Representatives is set up was purposefully crafted slowly over a period of, I think, about 50 years. And once it was to the likings of a certain political group, they set it in stone and said it will always be this way. And that was a slow thing. And now very few people even know that it is set up to favor certain groups of people.
Right. And so if most of us don't trust any of the institutions,
Yeah.
and we're looking at inflation and increased fuel prices, which often is politically used to combat, right? You always hear that,
Right.
well, California, we pay way too much for gas because of all of the taxes, which is true. We do have some taxes. But like, that's not why energy prices are going up everywhere, right? But it's a convenient foil for being like, see, that guy, he's the one who fucked everything up. If we just put somebody else there, right? And it really channels our anger and channels our energy into what we still acknowledge is a fruitless pursuit, which is electoral politics.
Yeah.
Right? Not entirely fruitless, but you have to consider how much energy you invest into something before you get a return. And at this point, all we keep hearing again from your Ocasio-Cortezes, who, when confronted with the force to vote thing, and are like, well, we had all these gains. We got more people like us elected. So, we just have to keep working at getting more people like us elected, when like they've all proven that none of them want to do a fucking thing. They don't want to put themselves and their careers and their comforts at risk to actually fight for anything. So it's a fucking pointless pursuit, in my opinion, to continue to invest energy in trying to get more people who think like me and therefore are good, when those people who say they think like me act like they act on behalf of the ruling class.
Right. And it's not surprising to see how quickly someone who espouses one point of view rapidly changes their behavior to not give the appearance of that point of view. Power is a corrupting influence, money is a corrupting influence, and we offer both to our politicians, and it works. It's those damn lobbyists. You throw enough money at someone, you bribe them legally, they're going to do whatever the hell you want.
So now we're looking at potentially as our probably best bet, besides labor organizing, right, and strategic working to build capacity. And unfortunately, it's all too late. Like when we talk about like, it takes time. We need 20 or 30 years. Like we don't have 20 or 30 years to fundamentally change the system, because energy crisis is now. Food crisis is now, right? Risk of nuclear war is now. Like we don't have 30 years to build capacity. All of you people involved in the anti-nuclear movement, God bless you, but you fucking fucked us over. And everybody that was part of the civil rights movement that got co-opted, right? Fuck you. And hats off to all the people who've been radicals, like the Black Uhuru movement, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, who recently, I think it was the middle of last year, FBI came in like fucking no-knock raids and kicked doors down, calling these people Russian assets, right? Because that's the narrative that's been built, that now they can just say, oh, you're a Russian asset, so we can take all your devices and go through discovery and pry into your personal doings, because they're radical fucking black liberationists who are training fucking doulas and other like clinic workers to try and address the fact that like black childhood mortality is so high, and that black women are more likely to die in childbirth than white women. And so they come and address this fact, and the FBI kicks their fucking door down and calls them fucking Russian assets. And hats off to the people like them doing the fucking good work outside of the system and keeping at it, instead of being fucking co-opted like your black congressional caucus and your Barack Obamas, who are just fucking black faces in high places, as they say, right? Like,
I've never heard that before.
What's that?
I never heard that before.
I think that's Cornel West, that he fucking hits Obama hard, dude. He's fucking, he's a radical, but then again, you see him side by side as a Revolutionary Blackout Network has had some kind of conversation, and Sister Soldier, I think is her name or whatever, that she used, talking to someone like Cornel West, and you realize that Cornel West, as radical as that fucking dude is, he's still a lot closer to those institutions and spoke in defense of those institutions, whereas like
Mhm.
actual radical kind of critique
Yeah,
carries
well,
beyond that.
and it's hard to keep your voice if you ostracize yourself
Mhm.
from media like that. And so you can
Yeah.
only be so radical before they stop giving you a voice and giving you a platform.
So we got not much time left. I wanted to try and wrap in about 2 hours.
Okay.
So what we can do is hit the streets, and that was the point I was making.
Yeah.
And it's a goddamn shame that like we're stuck in this position where they're telling us, who have basically spent our entire adult lives with less, right? Because we both were in our mid-20s when the financial crisis happened, right, in 2008.
Yeah.
And so like
I wasn't in a position to take advantage of it. It's my biggest regret.
yeah, our adult lives have been characterized by a system that will never fucking deliver for us,
Yeah.
right? And I feel even worse for people that are younger than us
Oh yeah, yeah.
because the system's delivering even less for them,
Yeah.
right? And
So much
so
so-
we're at this point where electoral politics doesn't work.
Yeah.
Sorry, you want to say something?
Oh, I was just gonna say so much so that they're just like, hey, if you could take this crushing debt off our hand from the school that you promised that would help us, that'd be great. And it's like that's their biggest hope is to
And
just
they're like,
be
"Yeah,
at zero, like not to get ahead, just to not be in
not be
crushing debt.
behind.
Yeah. Like,
It's fucking remarkable, right?
yeah.
But we've already seen some pretty inspiring things. I think I might have mentioned it on the show before, or maybe in private conversation, but like, I really have not experienced the level of catharsis again that I experienced when they fucking burned that precinct down in fucking Minneapolis.
Oh yeah.
I was just like watching a police station on fire and seeing the palpable rage being expressed, like,
Mhm.
made me fucking happy because I've been one of those people that for over a decade now have been like, all of this shit that we talk about, right, has been coming to a head and developing, and it's been transparent for dude since the fucking 70s, the 60s. We knew this shit was going on, and you had your kind of bourgeois political movements of the 1960s and 70s and the 80s with the anti-nuclear stuff. It bled into the 80s. And then everybody went back to brunch, right? Just like, oh, Trump is evil. And you have all these organizations that sprung up like DSA and got a bunch of members. I was a member. Sunrise Movement, Indivisible, and all these other, which wound up just being Democratic Party front groups.
Yeah.
Energy came in, money came in. They used them to get people interested in and then eventually funnel them for a fucking couple votes. And to funnel them into this system where we don't ask questions, because to question your party, right? They're always complaining about how fucking the Soviets were like, and China's like, oh, it's a one-party dictatorship. And it's like, then why do all I hear all the time is like, but the party, but the party, but the party.
Oh, yeah.
It's all fucking AOC said. Well, we're Democrats, and so the party. It's like, I don't give a fuck about your party.
Yeah, and like I don't vote for one group because I like them. I'm not allowed to do that as an American citizen. I have to vote for the thing that I think will fuck me the least. That's basically what American politics comes down to. Voting for the person that will fuck you the least.
That's so much better than lesser evil, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, I guess I'm stuck voting for the lesser evil. And just let's change the language.
Stuck voting for the person who will use lube at least.
Yeah. I'm going to use the person who may spit on it.
Yeah.
But at any rate, street protest has happened, will continue to happen. We mentioned Occupy Wall Street. We mentioned kind of more right-wing street protests with the convoys and anti-mask protests.
Yep.
Or you see them around here hating on homeless people. Well, they're getting a bunch of people and be like, all these people who can't afford housing in the most expensive housing market in the fucking world, practically. I think it's in the world. They're going to rape my baby because they're homeless.
Right.
It's fucking insane. But
and it's punching down. It's always punching down.
Yeah. Well, they have to because they are up. And if they don't want to punch up because they aspire to be up.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. Most of this is led by people who are fucking from money or at least mostly affluent. You don't see. I mean, there are poor people that are brought into it. And I think, that's a whole nother conversation for another day. Some of it has to do with camaraderie.
Mm-hmm.
I know fucking formerly homeless people that hate homeless people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because like
They got out of it. Why can't you?
or precisely that argument, that narrative, right? Or also like because desperate people prey on each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, other homeless people are an easier target.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And so
they're not going to
a
call the
lot of
cops,
that. And
the
so
cops don't care if they do.
it's a fucking shame. But let's talk about street protests. Can we get Medicare for all? Can we get an end to the surveillance state? Can we do all this by just protesting?
I don't think we can get into the surveillance state because people voluntarily give up their data.
Okay.
So I mean that would take people not wanting to use GPS to get everywhere, and I probably won't give that up. I like getting places easily. So I mean, I see the surveillance only continuing to get worse and worse. As for Medicare for all, I don't see why we can't. There's other places in the world that have it. The talking point that America's too different from those other countries for it to possibly work can only last for so long. I mean, there are other countries as large or larger than us that have, at the very least, gotten costs that are lesser than our costs, even if it's not totally socialized. They've had lesser costs. What was your last one?
It doesn't matter. It was a rhetorical question to lead into the next article.
It's too late.
But I appreciate you answering.
I answered your question. Damn it.
So let's do this BBC article. You got that queued?
Oh, you got it queued.
Is that the next one?
It should be, yes. The BBC 3.5% rule.
Yep. Okay, so there's this idea in the intellectual space that a threshold of 3.5% of the population can force change. I think in the United States, that's about 11 million. Do you want to do the math on that real quick, bud?
Mm-hmm.
And this is based on looking at social movements across the world and over a pretty broad period of history. I think at least 100 years or more. What's a 3.5% of the U.S. population?
About 11.5 million.
11.5 million people.
Yep.
Okay. And then, so that's a lot of people.
Yeah.
How many people were out for George Floyd? Like 1 million, right?
Great question. But yes, I do believe in that website that we were using earlier that it was 1 million.
Yeah, there you go. Or it's greater than 1 million, right? So participation maybe 1.2. So 10% in the, what was that? I think they mentioned that it was like one of the largest protests ever in the US or whatever.
Yeah.
Possibly in the world.
Geez, man. Yeah, it caused outside of the United States. Freaking Australia protesting. France, everywhere.
Oh yeah, dude, it was a global protest that was spurned by that, and protests are contagious. Look at the Arab Spring, right?
Yeah.
Look at Occupy Wall Street. When it just takes a handful of people, committed people, to like, because we all feel it. That's kind of what I was getting at with we don't trust any of our institutions.
Yeah.
Like, and they continue to try and divide us up. Like, oh, I call myself a communist and you call yourself a conservative, but ultimately we kind of want the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
We just call it something different and we have a different approach about how to get there.
Yeah. And identity politics really helps to, drive that wedge in. So,
right. So anyway, are we on this website, the BBC?
We are.
Great. So this highlights, and you can find her stuff. She did a TED Talk, TEDx Boulder. I say she, I don't know their pronouns. So anyway, their name is Erica Chenoweth, political scientist at Harvard. And I think I brought them up earlier, right? And I mentioned the color revolution, the Rose Revolution in Georgia. That was in 2003, which is an often cited example, but turns out was the result of CIA operations. So looking at 100 campaigns over the last century, this was part of her dissertation research, and she went to CU Boulder. Looking at hundreds of campaigns over the last century, Chenoweth found that nonviolent campaigns are twice as likely to achieve their goals as violent campaigns.
Mm.
You're like, oh, wow, that's a good reason for nonviolence.
Right.
And although the exact dynamics will depend on many factors, she has shown it takes around 3.5% of the population actively participating in protests to ensure serious political change. Actively participating. In the George Floyd uprisings, there might have been millions of people in the street worldwide, but how many of those were actively participating beyond showing up in the evening or showing up for a march or a rally?
Right. But
Many fewer.
that does raise the question: what is actively participating? I mean, just
I don't
showing
know
up.
the definition.
I mean, I would say just showing up and having a banner or a flag or something like that is.
That counts?
I would say that counts. I mean,
Okay.
how many people decided to just stay home?
Okay. So twice as likely, right? Chenoweth's philosophy builds on the philosophies of many influential figures: Sojourner Truth, Susan B. Anthony, Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., of course. And when she started, she admits that she was just studying violence and actually didn't believe that nonviolence was viable. And so she started from a position that I don't believe this. She went to a seminar. I'm kind of summarizing this and some of the stuff I've heard in her interviews and speeches. But basically, she didn't believe it. She went to the seminar where they were trying to encourage professors to include stuff on nonviolence in their curriculum. And she said, I don't believe that this is, that this is correct. And then she started doing her research. And then, of course, lo and behold, was like, oh, yeah, I guess so. Right. She was surprised to find no one had comprehensively compared success rates of nonviolent versus violent protests. Perhaps case studies were simply chosen through some kind of confirmation bias. Quote, I was really motivated by some skepticism that nonviolent resistance could be an effective method for achieving major transformations in society, end quote, she says, which is what I just mentioned. So this is where she got, and she wrote a book about it. They put the title here somewhere. We'll put it in the show notes. There you go. Why Civil Resistance Works, the Strategic Logic of Nonviolent Conflict. But anyway, so that was her dissertation turned into that book. They performed an extensive review of literature on civil resistance and social movements from 1900 to 2006. So there you go, about 100 years. A data set then corroborated with other experts in the field. They primarily considered attempts to bring about regime change, which on our Carnegie Tracker interactive tool there, they were not exclusive to regime change. Obviously, right, you had policy protests. And almost all of them said there was no outcome. Protests did nothing. Let's see.
Yeah.
A movement was considered a success if it fully achieved its goals, both within a year of its peak engagement and as a direct result of its activities. So they've taken this data pool and they've narrowed it down based on those criteria. A regime change resulting from a foreign military intervention would not be considered a success, for instance. A campaign was considered violent, meanwhile, if it involved bombings, kidnappings, and the destruction of infrastructure or any other physical harm to people or property. And that is where I begin to call bullshit on all of it, because I can't fathom, having been to many street protests, I cannot fathom a situation where you're overthrowing your government and you have enough people in the street to do so, and not one bottle gets thrown, not one fucking bank window gets smashed.
Right. At the very least, you would have to defend yourself against the police and the army and its etc. that's trying to keep the existing power structure going.
Right. Yeah, no fucking cops getting lumped in the head with a fucking stick.
Yeah, I mean, you can't just let yourself get beat and, sprayed with fire hoses and have that put on TV and hope that changes hearts and minds.
Oh, no. Dude, fundamentalist Gandhian nonviolent people absolutely say that's the only strategy, is to go and fucking get concussed and get brain damage, and eventually people will see how the state is overreacting and then take the state down. And it's your job to just be waves and waves of people walking forward and getting beat down or shot.
Okay.
Right. And you can see like the Palestinian right to return. I was very successful as a media operation because that's exactly what they did. Right. And then they just kept marching towards this fence that was erected that separated them from their traditional lands or neighborhoods or whatever. And the Israeli soldiers shot to maim, right? Not to kill. So shoot them in the legs, shoot them in the fucking spine so that they're, paraplegic or whatever.
Yeah.
And just hurt them and damage them. And it did have an impact in terms of raising awareness, I think. But it hasn't changed their plight. And right now,
I'd say at the same
you
time,
have a fucking like proto-fascist government in power in Israel.
Yeah.
Who wants to finish the final solution and exterminate them.
Yeah.
And so how successful was that successive waves of people willing to be crippled for the rest of their fucking lives so that like they can maybe win the hearts and minds of some fucking pink pussy hat wearing fucking white liberals in America? Like, I don't fucking get it.
I suppose
I'm not engaged in that struggle, and I support them in any way they feel they need to wage that struggle.
I mean, I would say here, it seems the argument would be that they just haven't sacrificed enough bodies yet.
There's only so many of them. They've been under such pressure,
Yeah.
like their water, they don't, constantly getting bombed. Their fucking water's dirty or not even available. Like,
Yeah, their lands are stolen, etc.
fucked.
Yep.
Okay, let's continue. Overall, nonviolent campaigns were twice as likely to succeed as violent campaigns. They led to political change. Here's the big one: 53% of the time, compared to 26% for the violent protests. So when you say they're twice as likely to succeed, people are like, "Oh wow, they're really fucking great," and then you find out they don't work half the time.
Yeah.
Right. So this is when I put in our tracking sheet that we use to kind of set the show up and for production or whatever. What I think I put in the notes, I was like, focus on the bullshit numbers.
Yeah.
And this is what I was talking about. Overall, nonviolent campaigns. Oh, I read that line. So 53% of the time, nonviolence, 26% for violent protests. This was partly the result of strength in numbers. Chenoweth argues that nonviolent campaigns are more likely to succeed because they can recruit many more participants from a much broader demographic, which can cause severe disruption that paralyzes normal urban life and the functioning of society. So that's basically like if more people participate, then economic activity comes to a halt, right? And one of the arguments I've seen too for specifically talking about like kind of underground struggles versus like kind of above ground nonviolent, or in that police document I think we'll include in the show notes that we're not going to get to today. They called it unlawful but nonviolent, which I think is a good way to put it.
Right.
Where, okay, you're acknowledging that like breaking the law and maybe minor property destruction like that is not, necessarily violent. That's just kind of expected.
Yeah, I would say that property or destruction is part and parcel with any revolution.
I would hope so, right?
Yeah.
And I think, in a later clip they talk about that, like Boston Tea Party, right? Like,
yeah,
what is that about property destruction? We fucking celebrate that shit.
Yeah.
And then you're like crying because they fucking smashed a fucking Bank of America window. Like, what the fuck?
Right. And the thing is, in both instances, the offended party was most likely insured, and you received money in return.
Local contractor that specializes in store windows that's got a job on Monday.
Look at that. They're job creators. So what you're saying is people that riot
windows are job creators. 100%.
Job creators. All right. Rioters, you're job creators. You heard it here first.
Also private security now, right? Like,
yeah.
Those guys that get paid $13.50 an hour to fucking Walk
You're
around the
not.
guy at the
You're
DMV that just
not.
stands there.
You're not
You
kidding, man.
See these people cussing out these DMV employees, and he's just fucking standing there
Yeah, I
doing nothing.
know. Rachel's got a friend who works in security, and they wanted to pay him. I think they were paying him like around 16 something, 17, and then
Not much.
Disney wanted him down south, Southern California, like one of the most expensive parts of California. And I think they were like, "Oh yeah, we can give you like $18." Oh my god, are you fucking kidding me?
Fucking crazy. All right, let's continue because we're over time now.
Yep.
Oh, another one I was gonna say in that drawing is in these kind of more underground formations, like it's more kind of like military than simple militant, and obviously even in militant tactics, it lends itself towards primarily younger men.
Mhm.
And so I think in this case, when they say strength in numbers, broader participation, is that anybody, even grandmas and children, can go out and wave signs and demonstrate or whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas like doing the after dark black bloc smashy is generally a young male pursuit.
You got to jump over a fence or a wall to get away.
Right, precisely. In fact, of the 25 largest campaigns they studied, 20 were nonviolent and 14 of those were outright successes. Overall, nonviolent campaigns attracted 4 times as many participants as the average violent campaign. And this was the bullshit number. Because you said, and this is bullshit. And I think in a previous show we discussed it could happen here and that guy and like, right? Did we do that?
We did.
Or am I,
Yeah.
like fabricating that in my head?
I do. I mean, I know who that is, and I hadn't heard of him before you talked to me. So
basically, the argument was like, dude, a few hundred well-organized fucking right wingers out of some militia in Reading can cause massive fucking disruption.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Like, and probably get the state of California to make serious concessions, just a couple hundred. So being like, you need 50,000 people.
Yeah.
That's bullshit. Also, they said 3.5% of the population. In what country is 200,000 people fucking 3.5%?
Let's see. X times 0.035 equals blah, 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 blah. So 50,000 divided by?
You do, yeah, I think so.
5.
Do me some math.
It's a small ass country. 1.5 million people.
4.5 million people.
No, 1.5.
1.5 million people.
That's a tiny country. There's 1.5 million people in freaking like Los Angeles County.
How many?
1.5 million. I think Los Angeles County is like 1.5 million people.
No, the city of Los Angeles by itself is 3.5.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Los Angeles County is like, I think the greater LA area, including the Inland Empire, is like 10 million. It's like almost half the population.
Well, there you go.
LA Basin or the Inland Empire.
Yeah, so that would have to be an incredibly small or a country
right.
for.
So a bullshit number, basically.
Yeah. And
so you're basically saying you need far fewer for nonviolent and far more for violent, when that actually is conflicting with your point. And I'd have to read the book. I don't know how they came to this number or if the BBC is reporting it incorrectly. So I don't want to totally shit on it. But just looking at this, go ahead.
Well, 50,000, it was 1.4 million. For 200,000, it's 5.8 million. But I mean, still, that's a really small country.
Yeah, I mean, 5.8 is a pretty small country. Yeah. There's not many countries that probably have that few people, unless you're like a little island nation or something.
Yeah.
So anyway, the point I wanted to make is that like, so they're saying they're more successful, but they need more participants. And they believe in this threshold. The evidence points to this like magic threshold of 3.5%. And then you look at a country like the United States and like, you would basically need, I mean, no, we have quite a few voters in the US. What is our voting population? Like 80 million? It's about a third of the population votes.
Yeah. So 180
to 100
million. Yeah, it should be about 110 million if it's a third of the population.
Right. Okay. So
we're about 330 million strong.
So you're talking about needing 1 out of every 10 people that votes to like be willing to spend day after day after day in the streets to get maybe success half the time. Right?
Yeah. And we don't really support protesters in this country.
We don't.
For the most part.
In fact, they often like do their best. Like, oh, come on, dude, Occupy Wall Street was the fucking worst. Like, you had every single major media outlet being like, just take a shower and get a job, which is just such a gross caricature, considering when I was at Occupy K Street, the camp during the day was very, very quiet. It was in the evening when people got off work and came there to engage in the process of dialogue and planning. In the weekends, primarily, or late evenings when actions happened.
Yeah.
And
so they were
like
all
most
still
of the
very much
people at
working.
the encampments had fucking jobs.
Yeah. How else would they be?
Of course.
That's the thing. Is like you can't afford to take action like this unless you have a job or unless you have saved money, like, or unless you're desperately poor and you got nothing else to do. So like,
yeah. So here they provide some examples. People Power campaign against Marcos in the Philippines attracted 2 million participants. Okay. The Brazilian uprising in 84 and 85 attracted 1 million. We had more than that for fucking George Floyd, right? The Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia in 89 attracted 500,000. Right?
Yeah.
And then, I mean, there is something very powerful. And in respect to Czechoslovakia and the Velvet Revolution, Chris Hedges was there. And he talks a lot about it in several of his lectures. Seemed like a very powerful experience. However, just because it happens there doesn't mean that's a viable model for organizing around. And that's my fucking point.
right.
Let me scroll here. There weren't any campaigns that failed after they had 3.5% participation during a peak event, says Chenoweth, a phenomenon she has called the 3.5% rule. Besides the People Power movement that included the Singing Revolution in Estonia in the 80s and the Rose Revolution in Georgia in the early 2000s. As I said, the Rose Revolution was a fucking CIA op. So, like, you're just bringing in examples being like, see, nonviolence can work but we're going to ignore if military intervention, we're removing those, if military, but you're not ignoring the fact of extra state meddling, right?
Yeah.
And so, are you with me?
I'm here. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to ask you, like, before we move on to I think it's the final clip, right? The submedia.
Yeah.
Yeah. Before we move on to that, I just wanted to get your take on that. Like, am I just being kind of like ridiculous about this, or is it right to question this 3.5 threshold? It feels like what is his name? Steven Pinker's kind of like, oh, the best years are ahead of us, and the world is like a better place and safer place than it's ever been. And it's all this kind of like lofty utopian kind of rhetoric, when like all the fucking observable facts tell you that things are not better than they were 20 fucking years ago.
Yeah, and I think what's going on there is they're coasting on a certain set of data. Because like you can look at some of the data and say that the world is getting better, that more people have been lifted out of poverty and such, and that's true in a lot of instances. But at the same time, more people have been lifted out of poverty so that they can be conscripted into the military, forced into work, and other less desirable outcomes of that nature, where it's like, cool, I'm not poor anymore, but I work like an 80-hour work week in some country here. In a lot of instances, I mean, you got old Muskie there saying that if you don't work at least 80 hours a week, that you're not trying. Like, So I would say that some of the good has been offset, at least in part or almost entirely, by the fact that, you now have more demands put on our lives. And so, like, it was our I believe, yeah, it was our grandparents, generation who had a great hope that there would be like a 30-hour work week, 4 days a week. And now that seems farther away than ever. As you have people that are, there's no longer guaranteed jobs. You don't have pensions. 401ks are a joke for a lot of people. And you're just part of the hustle culture.
100%. Are we
Yeah.
still up on this article?
We are. We can.
Okay, I just wanted to grab a couple more
Okay,
things here. You got an old lady wagging her finger.
Yeah, do it. Poker.
And then they also said something that I had mentioned earlier about physical barriers. You don't have to be fit and healthy to engage.
Yeah.
So here's one I wanted to point out. By engaging broad support, this is they say comes from research, but really to me it feels, and I'm gonna have to read this fucking book and look at how, because obviously PhD candidate, obviously like rigorous kind of intellectual exercise in looking at the information and piecing it together in a coherent way. Some of this feels like bias, right? And that you want to believe this is true, and that's why you say it. By engaging broad support across the population, nonviolent campaigns are also more likely to win support among the police and the military, the very groups the government should be leaning on to bring about order.
That feels like wishful thinking.
Right. Let me finish, and then we'll talk about that. During a peaceful street protest of millions of people, the members of the security forces may also be more likely to fear that their family members or friends are in the crowd, meaning that they fail to crack down on the movement. In our country, our communities are policed by people who don't live there.
Right.
So you were saying something before I asked to finish reading. Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, well, bullshit, because so many people that are in the military or the police, a lot of people in the military are forced there by their financial situation, but a lot of people in the police just want to kill people. And they like that the job gives them the opportunity to do that. And then, they had the argument, a little further up, how they may worry that their friends, their families are in the crowd. Dude, we're so divided nowadays. Like, if your friend doesn't believe the exact same thing that you believe, you might want him to die and he's no longer your friend. So, like, I don't buy it at all.
Right. And you have this like, oh, you're going to win support among the police. I will say in that one of the documents that'll be in the show notes, the MCCA or whatever, basically it's like this National Association of like police chiefs, or whatever, and they put together this fantastic document because it's like by cops for cops, and so in a lot of ways, like it really kind of exposes their thinking, right? There's another document associated with that group, I believe. That talks about police recruitment challenges. And so in a way, when you say you win support among police and the military, one way that the George Floyd uprisings and this awareness around Black Lives Matter and that whole movement for racial justice, especially when it comes to over-policing in the internal colonies that we call American cities, is that like police recruitment is down, but also unemployment generally is down. So there's like more options.
Yeah.
If there were fewer options, I don't think they'd have a problem with recruitment as much as they do. But
no,
it does tell
that
me
seems correct.
Yeah. And it does signal, because they're going to be there because they have never ending funding. They take like 60% or 65% of our discretionary budget in this city. And I think that's almost universal around the country.
Yeah.
About 65% of every city's discretionary budget goes to cops. Not programs to house people, not programs to provide drug addiction services or shelter for domestic violence victims or health care or education, after school programs, before school programs, school lunches, any of that shit.
The solution to crime, the solution to crime is never to make that crime less desirable. Like people aren't going to steal bread if they have bread. but it's never, to make the crime less desirable. It's always to just have more police to stop the crime once it's occurred.
Once it's after it's occurred, right? Because they
Yeah.
don't do really much preventative.
No,
Which is
not at all.
always the argument. If you have more cops, then people won't do crimes. It's like
No,
people
they have to
don't
do
do
crimes.
crimes because there's no cops around.
Yeah, people do
Otherwise,
crimes, but they
like
need to do the
I
crime.
would, yeah, it would be a fucking drug kingpin because cops are never around. They don't come out to my side town. Anyway, so while there is a problem with recruitment that we could say absolutely is because of how BLM and the George Floyd uprisings, etc., like really kind of created, I mean, that shit, there's a clear disdain for police. And you see it a little bit. You see a lot less of the Blue Lives Matter bullshit. And in like, prepper spaces that I've been in and stuff, you see a lot more kind of almost universal acceptance that like the police are not your friends.
Maybe, just maybe, all cops are bastards.
Maybe, just maybe, all cops are bastards. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it did have an effect.
Yeah.
But you're not winning support of people in the department because all they do is fucking back each other up. And if you're not willing to protect other people in your unit, other cops, then they push you out through harassment or other means. I mean, and I know there's examples of straight up fucking murder because in LA County Sheriff, which is notoriously has all sorts of like white supremacist gangs and shit that are part of it.
Yeah.
They fucking murdered someone who was basically spying on them.
I mean,
there was another sheriff deputy or whatever in the department and kind of joined up with these gangs. And then they found out that he was fucking reporting on them and they fucking killed him. Or it was an accident, right?
Yeah.
He died in a workplace accident.
Marine. There was the former Marine who wanted to make a difference. So he became a cop and he found out that the easiest way for him to make a difference was to kill other cops.
Wow. I hadn't heard that.
Oh, he was the guy who modified his car so he could basically hide in the trunk and snipe.
Oh, was this in Texas? During BLM protest, he was the one that like basically created kill zones.
Maybe. I don't.
Yeah, I remember there was one like shooter guy who was ex-military in Texas during the BLM protests. I forget exactly when, but yeah, they were like, dude, this guy has military experience. And didn't they wind up killing him with a fucking drone? They like took a little robot and drove it in there and blew him up.
I think
I might be confusing people.
I think we're talking about two different people. I'm thinking it was a DC guy.
Oh, it was in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah.
I think what I'm speaking about happened in Texas, and the cops are like, oh, shit. And then they extrajudicially murdered him, right?
Yeah.
They just sent a robot in with explosives and blew him up.
Yeah.
It's fucking crazy. Bro.
It's too hard to get people like that trials. I mean, public opinion might sway.
Crazy, bro. They couldn't have, like, sent the robot in with, like, tear gas or something.
Yeah,
try to flush him out, right?
No, as soon as you kill a cop, you're fucking persona non grata and you're dead.
Right. So anyway, let's move on to that last clip. The point is that like a lot of this is based on shit that like we can observe in our own lives, in our own day-to-day existence. That's kind of bullshit. Like this whole like, if you do nonviolence, then like the cops will like you more, and it's like, that's fucking horseshit.
Yeah, they're not here for us.
The best thing we could do is grind those motherfuckers down.
Yeah.
Make it harder for police departments to recruit. Make it more expensive for cities to fucking provide that security to property, right? Because that's what cops do. And I think the Supreme Court recently ruled. Did we mention this last week?
We did, that they don't have to protect.
They're not obligated to protect human beings. They're only obligated to protect property.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And so you have all that, and you have these cops that power trip, among other things. I'm in the way that the departments excise anybody that could be conceived of as a good cop. They don't exist. They don't make it very long.
Yeah.
Because the system is fucking corrupt,
being harassed.
Forces them out.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I mean, no, you're 100% correct. They will be harassed into quitting.
Right. Exactly. So you have this corrupt institution that basically protects itself before any other consideration. It's about making sure that we don't go to jail when we murder people. et cetera, so forth, right? And we protect our pensions and we get raises and all this other stuff while city services languish. You can't drive down a fucking highway without like, oh shit, I just paid, $150 to have my vehicle realigned and I just hit a big ass fucking pothole and I feel it pulling to the left again.
Yep.
So I have to go get it realigned because we can't fix fucking potholes because we're too busy giving cops more money, right? And giving them overtime because, they need to work those extra hours at that double pay or time and a half pay to go harass fucking homeless people who are just trying to fucking brown bag like a fucking 40 so that they can fucking sleep because it's fucking cold and it's easier to sleep when you're drunk.
Oh yeah.
Right? Like, Jesus fucking Christ. So let's move on to that clip. I'm going to close this up.
All right.
All together. You are ready?
Yep. Here you go.
Okay.
Why is militant resistance celebrated throughout history? Like, for instance, the American Revolution. But when it happens in the present tense, it's discouraged.
I think it's because the left, to a large extent, subconsciously, has as its primary role to make resistance harmless. States have recognized that resistance will never disappear, that struggles will never disappear. And in the past, they tried suppressing struggles the first time that they show their heads, if there's any sign of them, and that proved ineffective. So nowadays, the way that states rule is by accepting the inevitability of conflict and resistance and just trying to manage it permanently. And the best way to manage it is to also have people in the resistance who are managing it for you. And that's really the role that nonviolence plays, and it's really encouraged by the media, by various dominant political discourses, that the state is allowed to use violence, but people who are rebelling, people who are angry, people who are trying to attack the system are aggressively isolated, slandered, bad-mouthed, punished if they ever use violent tactics.
So yeah, I think we had several clips. Was that the first one? That felt like the second one to me. You're muted, I think.
I am. There is one more after that.
Okay, let's play that and then we'll have a quick discussion about it.
Right on, right on.
Same video.
Anytime someone brings up the idea of doing some
old
gangsta
video,
shit,
too.
these punk asses bring up Gandhi. What the fuck?
Advocates of nonviolence, they frequently say that nonviolence works, and the principal examples that they use of that are Gandhi in India and Martin Luther King in the U.S. The problem with that is that this represents this constitutes a really great historical whitewashing, that in fact the resistance in India was incredibly diverse, and Gandhi was a very important figure within that resistance, but the resistance was by no means pacifist in its entirety, that there were a number of armed guerrilla groups, a number of militant struggles, very important riots and other strong clashes which were a part of the struggle for Indian independence. So on the one hand, Gandhi basically got negotiating power from the fact that there were other elements in the struggle which were even more threatening to British dominance. So the British specifically chose to dialogue with Gandhi because he was, perhaps for them, the least threatening of the important elements of resistance.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I thought that was really important, because it's like one of the better critiques of the kind of fetishization of nonviolence, which I think has become a major fucking problem in left organizing, especially. And of course, like the objective is not to harm people or even harm property without like an absolute strategic clarity, right?
Yep.
But it is appropriate that we were putting this together, and then I was like, oh shit, we're actually recording or doing our live stream on Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, which he mentioned Gandhi and how there were other more militant elements that were part of Indian independence that history is told to forget about. Likewise, in the American Civil Rights Movement, Martin Luther King Jr. and his kind of ilk and his faction wing or whatever kind of had this like really kind of disciplined, he took that from Gandhi, right? And this more kind of disciplined, non-violent approach which again wasn't entirely effective, right?
Oh, yeah.
It was the fact that, like, even, you know, high level politicians in Washington, I forget where I heard this story. It might have been a Chris Hedges thing or something, but I remember hearing this story where it's like they brought these black leaders, right, into discussion with I think it was the attorney general or something like that, right?
Mhm.
High level government official in the federal government. And then basically, like, the thing is like, our bus boycotts and this, that, and the other thing, our marches, blocking bridges, etc., so forth, our rallies, whatever. Like, this is really, like, people are getting fucking tired of it, and they're growing impatient. And there's a whole group of people that this man, Martin Luther King Jr., has been able to keep calm and keep from going the militant, violent route.
Mhm.
Even though there were still kind of like factions willing to use violence, right? And violence
Right.
was used against them. So that's a whole nother story. But, like, you know, at some point you have to recognize, as he said, Peter Gelderloos said, this, why do we enter this space, right, where we're just like, the state has a monopoly on violence, and we are going to validate that
Mhm.
by not engaging in violence because the state has a monopoly on it, even though we're fighting the state. And it's like, everybody wants to cry about a broken window, but, like, not the fucking absolute destitution that the bank that got its window broke here, that had the branch window broken, is also financing, like, absolute destitution and near slavery abroad, right? Like, we
Right.
don't want to, like, we're kind of cherry picking how we define violence. Violence is no broken windows in nice bougie suburban neighborhoods, but it's absolutely, we're just going to ignore the fact that that bank facilitates this absolute violence, destruction of lives other places, not even abroad, like here in the United States as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Huh.
And you can see it during some of the protests that we had here. I think one of the more famous ones that got attention was the older gentleman who got pushed down by the police and cracked his head open on the concrete.
Yeah.
And you know, somebody, you know, one of them had a shred of compassion and was quickly corrected by his fellow police officer and told to just walk along, even though he was going to help the man up. He was like, "No, no, no, don't do that." You know,
We don't do that.
yeah, exactly.
We
That's too
break
much compassion.
schools, we
They
don't
might
provide
think
medical care.
exactly. They might think we're weak. They might think we were responsible. If we just move on like nothing happened, maybe maybe it'll be okay. And that's the sort of stuff where it's like, okay, so why should we abide by this rule of nonviolence if the people that we're facing off against do not abide by that rule? Like, I, I think we've proven, at least in this country, that being nonviolent doesn't give you the moral high ground because nobody gives a shit about the moral high ground here anymore. You know?
There is no morality.
Yeah.
Morals are subjective, right?
Okay.
You could, a lot of, and you know, elsewhere in that clip they talk about, like, oh, a bank, like the bank window gets broken, or the downtown, the CVS gets looted, or whatever in Minneapolis, or whatever it is, right?
Right.
And they're like, oh my God, look at all this fucking violence, like these people, and you know, but is that like, is taking some medical supplies from a fucking CVS to go help our comrades that are getting fucking hit, like getting concussed by fucking tear gas canisters to the fucking dome?
Yeah.
Like, and us trying to protect ourselves from this assault or whatever, even steal something you don't technically need, right?
Right.
Who is the fuck? Is that worth the life of George Floyd or the life of any of the other fucking black, brown, indigenous, and even white people that get murdered or maimed or otherwise seriously injured by police? No, it's not. Right? In my opinion.
No, I mean, it is an overreaction. It is it's just it's on a whole different level. But to say that breaking a window is the same as permanently destroying someone's vision is farcical.
Or
And
putting your knee on their neck and killing them
until they are no longer alive. Yes.
Yes.
And that's the thing is, like, property can be replaced, humans cannot. I mean, they can be, you know, we can have more babies, but it's not the same. That was a unique individual that is now dead.
Right.
And
did you
I
hear
think
about this 13-year-old that got fucking killed by a vigilante in DC?
no.
This
When was
happened
that?
like last week or a
Oh,
few
okay.
handful of days ago.
Mm.
I feel bad I don't know his name. But anyway, a kid got killed in DC. This guy came out of his house and was like, "Oh, I think they were stealing cars." And like, who gives a fuck if they stole your car or someone else's car? Like,
Yeah.
the crime for fucking Grand Theft Auto is not the death penalty.
Yeah.
And the last I saw, I don't know if there have been protests to try and get the police to react. The last I saw, I think the police took statements but decided they weren't going to detain and arrest him. Even though he went outside of his own domicile where he's protected. If he felt threatened, stay inside. And if they come to your door and try and force their way in, you are absolutely, even under the law, 100% justified in fucking defending yourself.
Yeah, I think it's called the Castle Doctrine.
It is called the Castle Doctrine. And I know it well because I'm always like, I'm not, if you own a firearm, you should probably know what your restrictions and limitations are. And Castle Doctrine's legal in California. But you know what wouldn't be illegal? Is me being like, oh, I heard someone, I think they were breaking into cars, and me running out and being like, bang, 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 bang. That would not be legal in California. And it's not legal in DC. But yet somehow cops decided they weren't going to prosecute this person or even arrest them or detain them. They took a statement and said, oh, well, the guy was committing crimes. And so, it happens. It should have been avoided, but, it happens. It's a fucking 13-year-old kid.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's fucking crazy, bro. And so anyway, like, what are we supposed to do? Get 11.5 million people? We can't even agree if fucking Pepsi or Coke is better in this country, right? And you're supposed to get 11.5 million people together. Where? There's so many cities in this country is so big. Where do we all concentrate?
And we can't afford to travel anymore. Hell, the only thing you can get 11.5
people to travel anyway.
Yeah. The only thing you can get 11.5 people or 11.5 million people to agree upon is that the end of Game of Thrones was bad. Like, that's the sort of thing that we'll get.
You're right. And Velma, I heard Velma has been getting hit really hard.
Because of the actress, right?
Oh, I have no idea. I just heard it's bad.
Like,
really bad.
Oh, okay.
It's just fucking tone deaf, and it's just. I've just heard it's really bad, and it's got like less than 10% on Rotten Tomatoes. Viewer,
probably got like 90
or whatever.
Well, then we all know it has about 90% from the critics. So.
No, actually, I think the critics even only like in the 60s or 70s.
Lambasted.
Did you see The Last of Us yet? Or do you not have HBO?
Is that what's that about?
Pedro Pascal and the.
Oh, no, I don't have HBO. I'll probably find a way to watch it.
Maybe I might give you my
sensitive way of saying it. The sensitive way of saying. I'll find a way to
our HBO password. No,
please don't crack down on us, HBO. Not like Netflix.
So anyway, the moral of the story. Did we have one more clip of Gelderloos? I don't think so. I think it was just 2, right?
No, that was Submedia. The only one we had left, it was from ABC News about Americans and violence. But I think we covered it.
Yeah. Basically, the last clip would have been ABC News, and they were just talking about how like more Americans. It would be good to have the numbers, but I think in 2017 it was like 8% right or left in this poll believed that violence might be okay sometimes.
Yeah.
To like 33% for people who lean right and like 31% for people who lean left is saying that like violence is okay sometimes.
Yeah.
To get what you want. So at any rate, the point kind of being is that like we have civil unrest, we have the conditions for more civil unrest. We need to change the civil unrest is because institutions aren't responding to crises, right? So how do we change our institutions? Do we change our institutions through putting on pink pussy hats?
And waiting for the second time you've said that. What is that?
What?
It's the second time you've said that. What is that?
Oh, bro, the fucking Women's March. The whole like after Trump got elected and they had this like all these grandmas, all these like fucking white-haired white liberals like
Oh.
sitting in their fucking suburban oversized houses that they don't need anymore because they don't have kids.
Children are gone. Yeah.
Yeah, and then they knitted or crocheted all these fucking pink beanies, basically, and they called them pussy hats. You don't fucking remember that?
No, man.
Look it up right now.
I kind of checked out after that.
Yeah, because it was all just fucking suburban white liberals doing their fucking bullshit spectacle, being like, I'm
Holy
really
shit.
inconvenienced because Donald Trump is a creep.
The first thing that came up was Pussy Hat Project, and it's trademarked.
Of course it's trademarked. They're not going to miss a fucking business opportunity, Zach.
Gotta make money off of fucking revolution. Oh, aren't they all so cute? Oh,
I don't even think they look like pussies, do they?
No, they're just pink.
It's just a pink fucking hat.
Yeah, I mean, they are the result of the Pussy Hat Project, a nationwide effort by two people, a screenwriter and an architect.
Of course, with fucking PMC jobs, right? Oh, but that was like genuine resistance in that kind of in what Gelderloos was saying in that Submedia clip, and I really missed that show. They have this like weird robot host now, and I really liked the fucking guy with the thick accent. I forget what they called him, but he was a cool host. At any rate, one of the things that Gelderloos had said is that like non-violent fetishization or this dogma that we kind of like, we have to be this way because like we discovered, people believe it's the most effective way because they're cherry picking data, right? Ignoring the CIA's role in some of those, ignoring, like in the case of the Indian independence movement or the civil rights movement or the suffragist movement. I think in one of the TED Talks that the woman that wrote that book did, she mentions the suffragists and how like we need to teach our kids about suffragists instead of the Battle of Bunker Hill. And it's like, are you going to teach them the fucking sterilized version where the suffragists were just like protesting and like withholding sex from their husbands to get what they wanted? Or are you going to tell the one where they fucking assassinated people and bombed buildings and burned buildings to the ground?
Let's do that
one. Fucking engaged in violence to get women's the right to vote.
That sounds like a much better movie. Let's do the second one.
I mean, it's the facts.
No, I'm
there
saying
were all manner of political assassinations and arsons, especially a lot of arson. When women were fighting for the right to vote. So when Chenoweth says this in a TED Talk, right? Oh, and we need to change our history books so they're less focused on like instances of violence like the Battle of Antietam or whatever, and more on like these social movements that use like the suffragists are like Indian independence in the American Civil Rights movement, in the sense that giving into a relatively minor demands was the easier option because otherwise it'd be continued burnings and political assassinations. In the case of the suffragists. And yes, they did have nonviolent protests, etc., so forth, but like they did not need to have this puritanical attitude because they existed before nonviolence became a way to suppress the left. And that was what Gelderloos was saying, is that we're handicapped and we're compartmentalized in this. This is the right way. And it's harmless to the state, as you saw in the Carnegie interactive map. Doesn't matter if we're protesting. Like that doesn't change anything.
No, the result is always no significant change.
And imagine in America if there were like, we had increasing like every weekend, like a yellow vest type thing. And every weekend it was gaining steam. What do you think would happen in just purely intellectual exercise of speculation? Probably the media would find a way to turn part of that group against the other part of the group.
Yeah.
Right? Like, did you hear that they're demanding that everybody gets transgender surgery? And now all of a sudden a bunch of people aren't protesting anymore.
Perfect example on a description of the pussy hat thing. It says that Critics have stated that the pink color of the pussy hats does not represent transgender women or women of color whose genitals are more likely to be brown than pink. So just breaking up any, like, even in this like watered down
True, though.
milk toast fucking.
They come in all shapes, sizes, colors.
No, I get it, but I'm saying like even in this very watered down form of protest, there was a division.
Oh, 100%.
Like,
And if we were getting close to this 3.5% figure, right? It's virtually impossible to get there, because like they're just, as soon as it represents a real threat, right? Like not a real threat because it's as a dogmatic nonviolent movement, presumably
it's no threat
it
at
would
all.
not pose a real threat. But if it was gaining enough traction to where like you couldn't ignore it anymore, right?
Yeah.
You couldn't shoot tear gas at it, or if it had this like broad participation they fetishize. So you got women and children, like you thinking cops don't fucking shoot tear gas into women and children.
Yeah.
Like they do. They murder them. They
Yeah.
They murder fucking little kids all the time, cops do.
Oh yeah,
right?
There's plenty of videos of women being thrown to the ground and tossed around by cops just as much as there are men.
Or magically suicided while handcuffed in the back of a police car.
Yeah.
Or whatever, right? Like they'll fucking kill us if they want to. And if there was a movement and you're like, okay, well now there's like kids and moms with strollers, and the cops aren't going to do. So even if the cops refrain from that, as soon as it like starts to get to a point where like they might be faced with real, well, ultimately what they'll do is they'll water it down so that they'll be like, here's your symbolic concession. Here's a day. Here's a statue in the National Mall for your Martin Luther King Jr.
Martin Luther King Day.
Because we want to fetishize this idea that if you just like sit at a lunch counter and take fucking racist being pieces of shit, that you'll somehow win legislation, when it didn't. It took a lot of that, and it also took some motherfuckers with guns and bombs to provide the contrast, to say, give the demands into us more peaceful protesters, no matter how detestable you find us. Or that is the logical conclusion, is you better be fucking in a fucking bunker behind a concrete wall because motherfucker, we're coming for you.
Yeah. See, I don't get the argument. Like, okay, cool. We got all these hearts and minds. Now we have all this like popular blah, blah, blah. But if there is no threat, why would the government, make a change? Like, okay, cool. Half the country, wants something. Okay, big deal. What's the result if they don't give it to us? If it's just more marches and more of this, then no, why would they make a change?
Yeah, and maybe the disconnect that we're not understanding is that they defined it as regime change. Their success or not success was based on regime change. And we know Biden we could have this huge protest and Biden resigns from office. And that would be like, oh, look, they did it non-violently. But the fact of the matter remains is the infrastructure and the power structure of the ruling class doesn't change. So who gives a fuck if the regime change? We want system change, and the system will never allow us. The ruling class will never allow us to change that system peacefully.
Yeah.
End of story, full stop.
You would just get another puppet. More puppets.
What's that?
I said, you just get another puppet. You get more puppets, like
more puppets. Could you imagine a fucking Kamala Harris?
What?
She'd probably just mass arrest people and then put us to work. And then, like, even though we were due to get out and served our time, she'd probably keep us there a little longer to do more work.
Well, you know how she would justify it too, is that you couldn't get your kids to school while you were in prison. And so we have to keep you in prison for longer since your kids weren't in school. So it makes total sense.
That's right. Anyway, I think this was really the latter half is a better conversation. I mean, but I do think it's really important to point out the energy depletion, because that's like the kind of the thesis of the show.
Yeah.
Right. The central skeletal thread or whatever that ties it all together. Right. Is that like we're kind of in this moment when like capitalism will not deliver. What is going to happen? We're already seeing it with civil unrest. How will that manifest itself in a whole bunch of ways? Potentially civil war, I think, is probably more likely, because I do not see all of us coming together, 11.5+ million Americans, to force system change. And moreover, that would be for regime change to be successful. And systems don't change like that. I mean, the Mexican Revolution, maybe we can do that. I'll do that. I'll do a little digging and maybe find some times when the system actually changed. Because in Mexico, the whole land ownership system, right? The hacienda system
Gotcha.
was broken down and peasants were given land.
Hell yeah.
So, but that also was not nonviolent.
Yeah.
Right. And so we're really kind of narrowing. If you're like, okay, cool, you change the fucking figurehead, but the system is still fundamentally exploitative.
Yeah.
Then really have you advance. And they're saying, see, nonviolence works. You can get to, and it's all just fucking propaganda that keeps us fucking hamstrung and keeps us fighting with each other because we can't have an honest conversation about bad tactics. And that's really hurt me politically, locally, as being like, this tactic isn't working. Let's reassess and maybe try something different. And no one really wants to. I mean, it's just like, no, if we just had more people show up to the city council meeting, then of course we'll get them to change their policy. No, we're not. We're not going to get them to change.
Yeah.
So let's maybe do something different. Let's maybe think about our tactics and try something different. Let's fucking shut down traffic coming into downtown on a Thursday night market. Make the businesses suffer.
Yeah.
Right?
That would not be
And
hard
tell
at
them,
all.
hey, businesses, you own the motherfucking politicians. Hey, developers, you own those politicians. You tell those politicians, we're not even talking to the politicians because they don't represent us. They represent you. So we're talking to you. Tell your fucking lawmakers to do these policies and build some fucking housing instead of having fucking people suffering out on the street and just like basically instigating like fucking fascism because everybody's so fucking mad. There's a fucking pile of trash in a tent that they're willing to fucking blow it all up.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to see poverty, because they don't want to believe that the party is over. That everything we've enjoyed as an industrial society for the last 100 years is over. It's over.
As we said before, you don't want to believe that that could happen to you. So it's easiest if you just don't see it.
Right. They just don't want to see it.
Yeah.
They don't want to believe that there's a structural, fundamental problem that transcends any kind of policy, which is that we based our entire economic existence, our ability to provision the things we actually need as organisms, and we've based it in a system that's absolutely dependent on non-renewable resources. That is basically the thesis of the show. And I feel like I haven't really got to really like breathe fire and brimstone for a fucking while, bro.
We'll have to talk about homelessness again. That'll get you breathing.
We'll have to talk about this subject some more and talk about this. So I'm going to do my research and find out where actual system change happened and see if that happened nonviolently. And my suspicion is no, it doesn't.
Yeah. But research done, then we'll see.
All right. We talk about all these things because this is our future. This is our now. This is our present.
I was about to say, yeah.
And we are in the process. I mean, when you have people who are taken seriously and when they're like, oh, if you have broad participation, then the cops will join you and they'll love you and it'll be all like fucking, rays of sunshine and rainbows and shit. And you're like, that's
just
not what cops do.
That'll solve everything.
It's all fucking propaganda. And
yeah.
And all we get is more cops. The more nonviolent protests we have, the more they justify this kind of reactionary bullshit where now even your squad members who are like, oh, we need to hold police accountable. And then when it comes to actual voting, they're like, give them more money. Right?
Yeah.
And you have all this bullshit because we're quickly slipping to a fascist police state where even the old white-haired liberals from affluent neighborhoods with affluent, PMC careers and their pink pussy hats are also going to be targeted by the fascist regime.
Only a matter of time. They get rid of their enemies one by one until there's no one left.
That's right. And you know what? It all sucks because here we are screaming into the wilderness because when liberty dies, it dies.
With thunderous applause.
Have a good one, friend. See y'all.
Subscribe, videos, etc. Like, subscribe. Engage. Talk with us. Yell at us. Tell us we're wrong. Tell us we're right.
Tell us you're right. Tell us in the comments below.
Yes.
If you think nonviolence is absolute fucking horseshit that serves state interest. I'm out. See you, bud.
There we go.